Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 241. Yudhishthira said, O child, why dost thou use language such as this, towards the frightened Kurus, who are now in adversity and who have come to us, solicitous of protection? O Vrkodara, disunions and disputes do take place amongst those that are connected in blood. Hostilities such as these do go on. But the honor of the family is never suffered to be interfered with. If any stranger seeketh to insult the honor of a family, they that are good never tolerate such insult coming from the stranger. The wicked-souled king of the Gandharvas knoweth that we are living here from some time. Yet disregarding us, he hath done this deed which is so disagreeable to us. O exalted one, from this forcible seizure of Duryodhana and from this insult to the ladies of our house by a stranger, our family honor is being destroyed. Therefore, ye tigers among men, arise and arm yourselves without delay for rescuing those that have sought our protection and for guarding the honor of our family. Ye tigers among men, let Arjuna and the twins and thyself also that art brave and unvanquished, liberate Duryodhana, who is even now being taken away a captive. Ye foremost of warriors, these blazing cars, furnished with golden flagstaffs and every kind of weapons belonging to Dhritarashtra's sons, are ready here. With Indrasena and other charioteers skilled in arms, for guiding them, ride ye on these ever-furnished cars of deep rattle. And riding on these, exert ye with activity for fighting with the Gandharvas to liberate Duryodhana. Even an ordinary Kshatriya, amongst those that are here, would to the height of his power, protect one that hath come hither for refuge. What then, O Vrkodara, shall I say of thee? Entreated for assistance in such words as, O hasten to my aid. Who is there, amongst those standing around me, that is high-souled enough to assist even his foe, beholding him seeking shelter with joined hands? The bestowal of a boon, sovereignty, and the birth of a son are sources of great joy. But, ye sons of Pandu, the liberation of a foe from distress is equal to all the three put together. What can be a source of greater joy to you than that Duryodhana sunk in distress seeketh his very life as depending on the might of your arms? O Vrkodara, if the vow in which I am engaged had been over, there is little doubt that I would myself have run to his aid. Strive thou by all means, O Bharata, to liberate Duryodhana by the arts of conciliation. If, however, the king of the Gandharvas cannot be managed by the arts of conciliation, then must thou try to rescue Suryodhana by lightly skirmishing with the foe. But if the chief of the Gandharvas do not let the Kurus off even then, they must be rescued by crushing the foe by all means. O Vrkodara, this is all I can tell thee now, for my vow hath been begun and is not ended yet. Vaisampayana continued, hearing these words of Ajatasattu, Dhananjaya pledged himself, from respect for these commands of his superior, to liberate the Kauravas. And Arjuna said, if the Gandharvas do not set the Dhritarashtra's free peacefully, the earth shall this day drink the blood of the king of the Gandharvas. And hearing that pledge of the truth-speaking Arjuna, the Kauravas then, O king, regained the lost tenor of their minds. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 242. Vaisampayana said, hearing the words of Yudhishthira, those bulls among men, headed by Bhimasena, rose up with faces beaming in joy. And those mighty warriors, O Bharata, then began to case themselves in impenetrable mail that were besides variegated with pure gold, and armed themselves with celestial weapons of various kinds. And the Pandavas thus cased in mail, and mounted on those chariots furnished with flagstaffs and armed with bows and arrows, looked like blazing fires. And those tigers among warriors, riding upon those well-furnished cars drawn by fleet horses, proceeded to that spot without losing a moment. And beholding those mighty warriors the sons of Pandu thus proceeding together, for the liberation of Duryodhana, the Kuru army sent forth a loud shout. And soon did those rangers of the sky flushed with victory, and those impetuous warriors, the sons of Pandu, fearlessly encounter each other in that forest. The Gandharvas were flushed with success, and beholding the four brave sons of Pandu coming to battle seated on their cars, they all turned back towards the advancing combatants. And, the dwellers of the Gandhamadana, beholding the Pandavas looking like blazing guardians of the world provoked to ire, stood arrayed in order of battle. And, O Bharata, in accordance with words of King Yudhishthira of great wisdom, the encounter that took place was a skirmish. But when Arjuna, that persecutor of foes, saw that the foolish soldiers of the king of Gandharvas could not be made to understand what was good for them by means of a light skirmish, he addressed those invincible rangers of the skies in a conciliatory tone and said, "Leave ye my brother King Suddhodana." Thus addressed by the illustrious son of Pandu, the Gandharvas, laughing aloud, replied unto him, saying, "O child, there is but one in the world whose behests we obey, and living under whose rule we pass our days in happiness. O Bharata, we always act as that one only person commandeth us. Besides that celestial chief, there is none that can command us." Thus addressed by the Gandharvas, Dhananjaya, the son of Kunti, replied unto them, saying, "This contact with other people's wives and this hostile encounter with human beings are acts that are both censurable in the king of the Gandharvas and not proper for him. Therefore, leave ye these sons of Dhritarashtra all endued with mighty energy. And liberate ye also these ladies, at the command of King Yudhishthira the Just. If, ye Gandharvas, ye do not set the sons of Dhritarashtra free peacefully, I shall certainly rescue Suddhodana and his party by exerting my prowess." And speaking unto them thus, Pritha's son, Dhananjaya, capable of wielding the bow with his left hand also, then rained a shower of sharp-pointed sky-ranging shafts upon those rangers of the firmament. Thus attacked, the mighty Gandharvas then encountered the sons of Pandu with a shower of arrows equally thick, and the Pandavas also replied by attacking those dwellers of heaven. And the battle then, O Bharata, that ranged between the active and agile Gandharvas and the impetuous son of Pandu was fierce in the extreme. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 243. Vaisampayana said, "Then those Gandharvas decked in golden garlands and accomplished in celestial weapons, showing their blazing shafts, encountered the Pandavas from every side. And as the sons of Pandu were only 4 in number and the Gandharvas counted by thousands, the battle that ensued appeared to be extraordinary. And as the cars of Karna and Duryodhana had formerly been broken into 100 fragments by the Gandharvas, so were the cars of the 4 heroes attempted to be broken. But those tigers among men began to encounter with their showers of arrows thousands upon thousands of Gandharvas rushing towards them. Those rangers of skies, endued with great energy, thus checked on all sides by that arrowy downpour, succeeded not in even coming near to the sons of Pandu. Then Arjuna, whose ire had been provoked, aiming at the angry Gandharvas, prepared to hurl against them his celestial weapons. And in that encounter, the mighty Arjuna, by means of his Agneya weapon, sent 10 hundreds of thousands of Gandharvas to the abode of Yama. And that mighty bowman, Bhima, also, that foremost of all warriors in battle, slew, by means of his sharp arrows, Gandharvas by hundreds. And the mighty sons of Madri also, battling with vigor, encountered hundreds of Gandharvas, O king, and slaughtered them all. And as Gandharvas were being thus slaughtered by the mighty warriors with their celestial weapons, they rose up to the skies, taking with them the sons of Dhritarashtra. But Dhananjaya, the son of Kunti, beholding them rise up to the skies, surrounded them on every side by a wide net of arrows. And confined within that arrowy net like birds within a cage, they showered in wrath upon Arjuna maces and darts and broadswords. But Arjuna, who was conversant with the most efficacious weapons, soon checked that shower of maces and darts and broadswords, and in return began to mangle the limbs of the Gandharvas with his crescent-shaped arrows. And heads and legs and arms began to drop down from above, resembling a shower of stones. And at that sight, the foe was struck with panic. And as the Gandharvas were being slaughtered by the illustrious son of Pandu, they began to shower from the skies a heavy downpour of shafts upon Arjuna, who was on the surface of the earth. But that chastiser of foes, Arjuna, endued with mighty energy, checked that shower of arrows by means of his own weapons and began, in return, to wound them. Then Arjuna of the Kuru race shot his well-known weapons called Stunakarna, Indrajala, Sora, Agneya, and Samya. And the Gandharvas, consumed by the fiery weapons of Kunti's son, began to suffer heavily, like the sons of Dithi, while being scorched by Sakra's thunderbolt. And when they attacked Arjuna from above, they were checked by his net of arrows. And while they attacked him from all sides on the surface of the earth, they were checked by his crescent-shaped arrows. And beholding the Gandharvas put in fear by Kunti's son, Chitrasena rushed, O Bharata, at Dhananjaya, armed with a mace. And as the king of the Gandharvas was rushing at Arjuna from above with that mace in hand, the latter cut with his arrows that mace wholly made of iron into 7 pieces. And beholding that mace of his cut into many pieces by Arjuna of great activity, with his arrows, Chitrasena, by means of his science, concealed himself from the view of the Pandava and began to fight with him. The heroic Arjuna, however, by means of his own celestial weapons, checked all the celestial weapons that were aimed at him by the Gandharvas. And when the chief of the Gandharvas saw that he was checked by the illustrious Arjuna with those weapons of his, he entirely disappeared from sight by help of his powers of illusion. And Arjuna, observing that the chief of the Gandharvas was striking at him concealed from sight, attacked his assailant with celestial weapon inspired with proper mantras. And the multiform Dhananjaya, filled with wrath, prevented the disappearance of his foe by means of his weapon known by the name of Sabdaveda. And assailed with those weapons by the illustrious Arjuna, his dear friend, the king of the Gandharvas, showed himself unto him. And Chitrasena said, "Behold in me thy friend battling with thee." And beholding his friend Chitrasena exhausted in the battle, that bull among the sons of Pandu withdrew the weapons he had shot. And the other sons of Pandu, beholding Arjuna withdraw his weapons, checked their flying steeds and the impetus of their weapons, and withdrew their bows. And Chitrasena and Bhima and Arjuna and the twins, inquiring about one another's welfare, sat a while on their respective cars. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 244. Vyasa said, Then that mighty bowman of blazing splendor, Arjuna, smilingly said unto Chitrasena in the midst of the Gandharv host, What purpose dost thou serve, O hero, in punishing the Kauravas? Oh, why also hath Suddhodana with his wives been thus punished? Chitrasena replied, O Dhananjaya, without stirring from my own abode I became acquainted with the purpose of the wicked Duryodhana and the wretched Karna in coming hither. The purpose was even this, knowing that ye are exiles in the forest and suffering great afflictions, as if ye had none to take care of you, himself in prosperity, this wretch entertained the desire of beholding you plunged in adversity and misfortune. They came hither for mocking you and the illustrious daughter of Drupada. The Lord of the Celestials also, having ascertained this purpose of theirs, told me, Go thou and bring Duryodhana hither in chains along with his counselors. Dhananjaya also with his brother should always be protected by thee in battle, for he is thy dear friend and disciple. At these words of the Lord of the Celestials I came hither speedily. This wicked prince hath also been put in chains. I will now proceed to the region of the Celestials, whither I will lead this wicked wight at the command of the slayer of Paka. Arjuna answered, saying, O Chitrasena, if thou wishest to do what is agreeable to me, set Suddhodana free, at the command of King Yudhishthira the Just, for he is our brother. Chitrasena said, This sinful wretch is always full of vanity. He deserveth not to be set free. O Dhananjaya, he hath deceived and wronged both King Yudhishthira the Just and Krishna. Yudhishthira the son of Kunti as yet knoweth not the purpose on which the wretch came hither. Let the king, therefore, do what he desires after knowing everything. Vyasa continued, After this, all of them went to King Yudhishthira the Just. And going unto the king, they represented unto him everything about Duryodhana's conduct. And Ajatasattu, hearing everything that the Gandharvas had said, liberated all the Kauravas and applauded the Gandharvas. And the king said, Fortunate it is for us that though gifted with great strength, ye did not yet slay the wicked son of Dhritarashtra along with all counselors and relatives. This, O sir, hath been an act of great kindness done to me by the Gandharvas. The honor also of my family is saved by liberating this wicked wight. I am glad at seeing you all. Command me what I am to do for you. And having obtained all you wish, return ye soon whence ye came. Thus addressed by the intelligent son of Pandu, the Gandharvas became well pleased and went away with the Apsaras. And the Lord of the Celestials then, coming to that spot, revived those Gandharvas that had been slain in the encounter with the Kurus, by sprinkling the celestial Amrita over them. And the Pandavas also, having liberated their relatives along with the ladies of the royal household, and having achieved that difficult feat, the defeat of the Gandharvas' host, became well pleased. And those illustrious and mighty warriors worshipped by the Kurus along with their sons and wives, blazed forth in splendor like flaming fires in the sacrificial compound. And Yudhishthira, then addressing the liberated Duryodhana in the midst of his brothers, from affection, told him these words, O child, never again do such a rash act. O Bharata, a rash wight never cometh by happiness. O son of the Kuru race, pleased be thou with all thy brothers. Go back to thy capital as pleaseth thee, without yielding thyself to despondency or cheerlessness. Vaisampayana continued, thus dismissed by the son of Pandu, King Duryodhana then saluted King Yudhishthira the just and overwhelmed with shame, and his heart rent in twain, mechanically set out for his capital, like one destitute of life. And after the Kaurava prince had departed, the brave Yudhishthira, the son of Kunti, along with his brothers, was worshipped by the Brahmanas, and surrounded by those Brahmanas endued with the wealth of asceticism, like Sakra himself by the celestials, he began to pass his days happily in the woods of Dwaita. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 245. Janamejaya said, after his defeat and capture by the foe and his subsequent liberation by the illustrious sons of Pandu by force of arms, it seemeth to me that the entry into Hastinapura of the proud, wicked, boastful, vicious, insolent, and wretched Duryodhana, engaged in insulting the sons of Pandu and bragging of his own superiority, must have been exceedingly difficult. Describe to me in detail, O Vaisampayana, the entry into the capital of that prince overwhelmed with shame and unmanned by grief. Vaisampayana said, dismissed by the king Yudhishthira the just, Dhritarashtra's son Suyoddhana, bending his head down in shame and afflicted with grief and melancholy, set out slowly. And the king, accompanied by his 4 kinds of forces, proceeded towards his city, his heart rent in grief and filled with thoughts of his defeat along the way in a region that abounded in grass and water. The king encamped on a delightful piece of ground as pleased him best, with his elephants and cars and cavalry and infantry stationed all around. And as the king Duryodhana was seated on an elevated bedstead endued with the effulgence of fire, himself looking like the moon under an eclipse, towards the small hours of the morning Karna, approaching him, said, Fortunate it is, O son of Gandhari, that thou art alive. Fortunate it is, that we have once more met. By good luck it is that thou hast vanquished the Gandharvas capable of assuming any form at will. And, O son of the Kuru race, it is by good luck alone that I am enabled to see thy brothers' mighty warriors all come off victorious from that encounter, having subjugated their foes. As regards myself, assailed by all the Gandharvas, I fled before thy eyes, unable to rally our flying host. Assailed by the foe with all his might, my body mingled with their arrows, I sought safety in flight. This, however, O Bharata, seemed to me to be a great marvel that I behold you all come safe and sound in body, with your wives, troops, and vehicles, out of that superhuman encounter. O Bharata, there is another man in this world who can achieve what thou, O king, hast achieved in battle today with thy brothers. Vaisampayana continued, thus addressed by Karna, King Duryodhana replied unto the ruler of the Angas in a voice choked with tears. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 246. Duryodhana said, O Ratheya, thou knowest not what hath happened. Therefore, I do not resent thy words. Thou thinkest the hostile Gandharvas to have been vanquished by me with my own energy. O thou of mighty arms, my brothers, indeed had for a long time, aided by me fought with the Gandharvas. The slaughtered, indeed, on both sides were great. But when those brave Gandharvas, resorting to their many powers of illusion, ascended the skies and began to fight with us thence, our encounter with them ceased to be an equal one. Defeat then was ours, and even captivity. And afflicted with sorrow, we along with our attendants and counselors and children and wives and troops and vehicles were being taken by them through the skies. It was then that some soldiers of ours and some brave officers repaired in grief unto the sons of Pandu, those heroes that never refuse succor to those that ask for it. And having gone to them they said, Here is King Duryodhana, the son of Dhritarashtra, who with his younger brothers and friends and wives is being led away a captive by the Gandharvas along the sky. Blessed be ye. Liberate the king along with the women of the royal household. Suffer no insult to be offered unto all the ladies of the Kuru race. And when they had spoken thus, the eldest of Pandu's sons, who was endued with a virtuous soul, then conciliated his brothers and commanded them to liberate us. Then those bulls among men, the Pandavas, overtaking the Gandharvas, solicited our release in soft words, although fully able to effect it by force of arms. And when the Gandharvas, addressed in such conciliatory words, refused to set us at liberty, then Arjuna and Bhima and the twins, endued with mighty energy, shot showers of arrows at the Gandharvas. Then the Gandharvas, abandoning the fight, fled through the sky, dragging our melancholy selves after them, filled with joy. Then we beheld a network of arrows spread all around by Dhananjaya, who was also shooting celestial weapons upon the foe. And seeing the points of the horizon covered by Arjuna with a thick network of sharp arrows, his friend, the chief of the Gandharvas, showed himself. And Chitrasena and Arjuna, embracing each other, inquired after each other's welfare. And the other sons of Pandu also embraced the chief of the Gandharvas and were embraced by him. And inquiries of courtesy passed between them also. And the brave Gandharvas then abandoning their weapons and mail mingled in a friendly spirit with the Pandavas. And Chitrasena and Dhananjaya worshipped each other with regard. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 247. Duryodhana said, that slayer of hostile heroes, Arjuna, then approaching Chitrasena, smilingly addressed him in these manly words, O hero, O foremost of the Gandharvas, it behoveth thee to set my brothers at liberty. They are incapable of being insulted as long as the sons of Pandu are alive. Thus addressed by the illustrious son of Pandu, the chief of the Gandharvas, O Karna, disclosed unto the Pandavas the object we had in view in proceeding to that place, viz., that we came there for casting our eyes on the sons of Pandu with their wife, all plunged in misery. And while the Gandharva was disclosing those counsels of ours, overwhelmed with shame I desired the earth to yield me a crevice, so that I might disappear there and then. The Gandharvas then, accompanied by the Pandavas, went to Yudhishthira, and, disclosing unto him also counsels, made us over, bound as we were, to him. Alas, what greater sorrow could be mine than that I should thus be offered as a tribute unto Yudhishthira, in the very sight of the women of our household, myself in chains and plunged in misery, and under the absolute control of my enemies. Alas, they, who have ever been persecuted by me, they unto whom I have ever been a foe released me from captivity, and wretch that I am indebted to them for my life. If, O hero, I had met with my death in that great battle, that would have been far better than that I should have obtained my life in this way. If I had been slain by the Gandharvas, my fame would have spread over the whole earth, and I should have obtained auspicious regions of eternal bliss in the heaven of Indra. Listen to me therefore, ye bulls among men, as to what I intend to do now. I will stay here foregoing all food, while ye all return home. Let all my brothers also go to Hastinapura. Let all our friends, including Karna, and all our relatives headed by Dasasana, return now to the capital. Insulted by the foe, I myself will not repair thither. I who had before wrested from the foe his respect, I who had always enchanced the respect of my friends, have now become a source of sorrow unto friends and of joy unto enemies. What shall I now say unto the king, going to the city named after the elephant? What will Bhishma and Drona, Kripa, and Drona's son, Vidura and Sanjaya, Vahuka and Somadatta and other revered seniors, what will the principal men of the other orders and men of independent professions say to me, and what shall I say unto them in reply? Having hitherto stayed over the heads of my enemies, having hitherto trod upon their breasts, I have fallen away from my position. How shall I ever speak with them? Insolent men having obtained prosperity and knowledge and affluence are seldom blessed for any length of time like myself, puffed up with vanity. Alas, led by folly, I have done a highly improper and wicked act, for which, fool that I am, I have fallen into such distress. Therefore, will I perish by starving, life having become insupportable to me. Relieved from distress by the foe, what man of spirit is there who can drag on his existence? Proud as I am, shorn of manliness, the foe hath laughed at me, for the Pandavas possessed of prowess have looked at me plunged in misery. Vaisampayana continued, while giving way to such reflections Duryodhana spoke unto Dasasana thus, O Dasasana, listen to these words of mine, O thou of the Bharata race. Accepting this installation that I offer thee, be thou king in my place. Rule thou the wide earth, protected by Karna and Suvala's sons. Like Indra himself looking after the Maruts, cherish thou thy brothers in such a way that they may all confide in thee. Let the friends and relatives depend on thee like the gods depending on him of 100 sacrifices. Always shouldst thou bestow pensions on Brahmanas, without idleness, and be thou ever the refuge of thy friends and relatives. Like Vishnu looking after the celestials, thou shouldst always look after all consanguineous relatives. Thou shouldst also ever cherish thy superiors. Go, rule thou the earth, gladdening thy friends and reproving thy foes. And clasping his neck, Duryodhana said, Go. Hearing these words of his, Dussasana, in perfect cheerlessness and overwhelmed with great sorrow, his voice choked in tears, said, with joined hands and bending his head unto his eldest brother, Relent. And saying this he fell down on earth with heavy heart. And afflicted with grief, that tiger among men, shedding his tears on the feet of his brother, again said, This will never be. The earth may split, the vault of heaven may break in pieces, the sun may cast off his splendor, the moon may abandon his coolness, the wind may forsake its speed, the Himavat may be moved from its sight, the waters of the ocean may dry up, and fire may abandon its heat, yet I, O king, may never rule the earth without thee. And Dussasana repeatedly said, Relent, O king. Thou alone shalt be king in our race for 100 years. And having spoken thus unto the king, Dussasana began to weep melodiously, catching, O Bharata, the feet of his eldest brother deserving of worship from him. And beholding Dussasana and Duryodhana thus weeping, Karna in great grief approached them both and said, Ye, Kuru princes, why do you thus yield to sorrow like ordinary men, from senselessness? Mere weeping can never ease a sorrowing man's grief. When weeping can never remove one's griefs, what do you gain by thus giving way to sorrow? Summon patience to your aid to not gladden the foe by such conduct. O king, the Pandavas only did their duty in liberating thee. They that reside in the dominions of the king should always do what is agreeable to the king. Protected by thee, the Pandavas are residing happily in thy dominion. It behoveth thee not to indulge in such sorrow like an ordinary person. Behold, thy uterine brothers are all sad and cheerless at seeing thee resolve to put an end to thy life by foregoing food. Blessed be thou. Rise up and come to thy city and console these thy uterine brothers. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 248. Kama continued, O king, this conduct of thine today appeareth to be childish. O hero, O slayer of foes, what is to be wondered at in this, that the Pandavas liberated thee when thou wert vanquished by the foe? O son of the Kuru race, those that reside in the territories of the king, especially those, amongst them, that lead the profession of arms, should always do what is agreeable to the king, whether they happen to be known to their monarch or unknown to him. It happened often that foremost men who crush the ranks of the hostile host are vanquished by them and are rescued by their own troops. They that leading the profession of arms reside in the king's realm should always combine and exert themselves to the best of their power for the king. If, therefore, O king, the Pandavas, who live in the territories, have liberated thee, what is there to be regretted at in this? That the Pandavas, O best of kings, did not follow thee when thou didst march forth to battle at the head of thy troops has been an improper act on their part. They had before this come under thy power, becoming thy slaves. They are, therefore, bound to aid thee now, being endued with courage and might and incapable of turning away from the field of battle. Thou art enjoying all the rich possessions of the Pandavas. Behold them yet alive, O king. They have not resolved to die, foregoing all food. Blessed be thou. Rise up, O king. It behoveth thee not to indulge in great sorrow long. O king, it is the certain duty of those that reside in the king's realm to do what is agreeable to the king. Where should the regret be in all this? If thou, O king, dost not act according to my words, I shall stay here employed in reverentially serving thy feet. O bull among men, I do not desire to live deprived of thy company. O king, if thou resolvest to slay thyself by foregoing food, thou wilt simply be an object of laughter with other kings. Vaisampayana continued, thus addressed by Karna, King Duryodhana, firmly resolved to leave the world, desired not to rise from where he sat today. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 249. Vyasa said, beholding King Duryodhana, incapable of putting up with an insult, seated with the resolution of giving up life by foregoing food, Sakuni, the son of Suvala, said these words to comfort him. Sakuni said, O son of the Kuru race, you have just heard what Kama hath said. His words are, indeed, fraught with wisdom. Why wouldst thou, abandoning from foolishness the high prosperity that I won for thee, cast off thy life today, O king, yielding to silliness? It seemeth to me today that thou hast never waited upon the old. He that cannot control sudden accession of joy or grief is lost even though he may have obtained prosperity, like an unburnt earthen vessel in water. That king who is entirely destitute of courage, who hath no spark of manliness, who is the slave of procrastination, who always acts with indiscretion, who is addicted to sensual pleasures, is seldom respected by his subjects. Benefited as thou hast been, whence is this unreasonable grief of thine? Do not undo this graceful act done by the sons of Pritha, by indulging in such grief. When thou shouldst joy and reward the Pandavas, thou art grieving, O king? Indeed, this behavior of thine is inconsistent. Be cheerful, do not cast away thy life, but remember with a pleased heart the good they have done thee. Give back unto the sons of Pritha their kingdom, and win thou both virtue and renown by such conduct. By acting in this way, thou mayst be grateful. Establish brotherly relations with the Pandavas by being friends, and give them their paternal kingdom, for then thou wilt be happy. Vyasa continued, hearing these words of Sakuni, and seeing the brave Dussasana lying prostrate before him unmanned by fraternal love, the king raised Dussasana and, clasping him in his well-round arms, smelt his head from affection. And hearing these words of Karna and Savala, King Duryodhana lost heart more than ever, and he was overwhelmed with shame, and utter despair overtook his soul. And hearing all that his friend said, he answered with sorrow, I have nothing more to do with virtue, wealth, friendship, affluence, sovereignty, and enjoyments. Do not obstruct my purpose, but leave me all of you. I am firmly resolved to cast away my life by foregoing food. Return to the city, and treat my superiors there respectfully. Thus addressed by him, they replied unto that royal grinder of foes, saying, O monarch, the course that is thine is also ours, O Bharata. How can we enter the city without thee? Vyasa continued, though addressed in all manner of ways by his friends and counselors and brothers and relatives, the king wavered not from his purpose. And the son of Dhritarashtra, in accordance with his purpose, spread kusa grass on the earth, and purifying himself by touching water, sat down upon that spot. And clad in rags and kusa grass he set himself to observe the highest vow. And stopping all speech, that tiger among kings, moved by the desire of going to heaven, began to pray and worship, internally suspending all external intercourse. Meanwhile the fierce Daityas and the Danavas, who had been defeated of old by the Celestials, and had been dwelling in the nether regions, having ascertained Duryodhana's purpose, and knowing that if the king died their party would be weakened, commenced a sacrifice with fire for summoning Duryodhana to their presence. And mantra-knowing persons then commenced with the help of formulae declared by Brihaspati and Usanas, those rites that are indicated in the Atharva Veda and the Upanishads, and which are capable of being achieved by mantras and prayers. And Brahmins of rigid vows, well versed in the Vedas and the branches, began, with rapt soul, to pour libations of clarified butter and milk into the fire, uttering mantras. And after those rites were ended, a strange goddess, O king, with mouth wide open, arose from the sacrificial fire, saying, What am I to do? And the Daityas, with well-pleased hearts, commanded her, saying, Bring thou hither the royal son of Dhritarashtra, who is even now observing the vow of starvation for getting rid of his life. Thus commanded, she went away, saying, So be it. And she went in the twinkling of an eye to that spot where Suddhodana was. And taking up the king back to the nether regions, and having brought him thus in a moment, she apprised the Danavas of it. And the Danavas, beholding the king brought into their midst in the night, united together, and all of them with well-pleased hearts and eyes expanded in delight addressed these flattering words to Duryodhana. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 250. The Danavas said, O Suddhodana, O great king! O perpetuator of the race of Bharata, thou art ever surrounded by heroes and illustrious men. why hast thou, then, undertaken to do such a rash act as the vow of starvation? The suicide ever sinketh into hell and becometh the subject of calumnious speech. Nor do intelligent persons like thee ever set their hands to acts that are sinful and opposed to their best interests and striking at the very root of their purposes. Restrain this resolve of thine, therefore, O king, which is destructive of morality, profit, and happiness, of fame, prowess, and energy, and which enhanceth the joy of foes. O exalted king, know the truth, the celestial origin of thy soul, and the maker of thy body, and then summon thou patience to thy aid. In days of old, O king, we have obtained thee, by ascetic austerities from Mahesvara. The upper part of thy body is wholly made of an assemblage of Vajras, and is, therefore, invulnerable to weapons of every description, O sinless one. The lower part of thy body, capable of captivating the female heart by its comeliness, was made of flowers by the goddess herself, the wife of Mahadeva. Thy body is thus, O best of kings, the creation of Mahesvara himself and his goddess. Therefore, O tiger among kings, thou art of celestial origin, not human. Other brave Kshatriyas of mighty energy, headed by Bhagadatta, and all acquainted with celestial weapons, will slay thy foes. Therefore, let this grief of thine cease. Thou hast no cause for fear. For aiding thee, many heroic Danavas have been born on the earth. Other Asuras will also possess Bhishma and Drona and Kama and others. Possessed by those Asuras, these heroes will cast away their kindness and fight with thy foes. Indeed, when the Danavas will enter their heart and possess them completely, flinging all affections to a distance, becoming hard-hearted, these warriors will strike every body opposed to them in battle without sparing sons, brothers, fathers, friends, disciples, relatives, even children and old men. Blinded by ignorance and wrath, and impelled by that destiny which hath been ordained by the Creator, these tigers among men, with hearts steeped in sin, will, O thou foremost of the Kurus, depopulate the earth by hurling and shooting all kinds of weapons, with great manliness and strength, and always addressing one another boastfully with words such as these: Thou shalt not escape from me today with life. And these illustrious sons of Pandu also, 5 in number, will fight with these. And, endued with mighty strength and favored by fate, they will compass the destruction of these. And, O king, many Daityas and Rakshasas also that have been born in the Kshatriya order, will fight with great prowess in the battle with thy foes, using maces and clubs and lances and various weapons of a superior kind. And, O hero, with respect to the fear that is in thy heart rising from Arjuna, we have already settled the means for slaying Arjuna. The soul of the slain Naraka hath assumed the form of Karna. Recollecting his former hostility, he will encounter both Kesava and Arjuna. And that mighty warrior and foremost of smiters, proud of his prowess, will vanquish Arjuna in battle, as also all thy enemies. The wielder of the thunderbolt, knowing all this, and desirous of saving Arjuna, will in disguise take away from Karna his earrings and coat of mail. We also have for that reason appointed hundreds upon hundreds and thousands upon thousands of Daityas and Rakshasas, viz., those that are known by the name of Samsaptakas. These celebrated warriors will slay the heroic Arjuna. Therefore, grieve not, O king. Thou wilt rule the whole earth, O monarch, without a rival. Do not yield to despondency. Conduct such as this does not suit thee. O thou of the Kuru race, if thou deest, our party becometh weak. Go thou, O hero, and let not thy mind be directed to any other course of action. Thou art ever our refuge, as, indeed, the Pandavas are the refuge of the gods. Vaisampayana continued, having addressed him thus: Those Daityas embraced that elephant among kings, and those bulls among the Danavas cheered that irrepressible one like a son. And, O Bharata, pacifying his mind by soft speech, they permitted him to depart, saying, Go and attain victory. And when they had given leave to the mighty armed one, that very goddess carried him back to the spot where he had sat down, intent upon putting an end to his life. And having set that hero down and paid him homage, the goddess vanished, taking the king's permission. O Bharata, when she had gone, King Duryodhana considered all that had happened as a dream. He then thought within himself, I shall defeat the Pandavas in battle. And Suddhodana thought that Karna and the Samsaptaka army were both able to destroy and intent upon destroying that slayer of foes, Partha. Thus, O bull of the Bharata race, the hope was strengthened of the wicked-minded son of Dhritarashtra of conquering the Pandavas. And Karna also, his soul and faculties possessed by the inmost soul of Naraka, had at that time cruelly determined to slay Arjuna. And those heroes the Samsaptakas also having their sense possessed by the Rakshasas and influenced by the qualities of emotion and darkness were desirous of slaying Falguna. And, O king, others with Bhishma, Drona, and Kripa at their head, having their faculties influenced by the Danavas, were not so affectionate towards the sons of Pandu as they had been. But King Suddhodana did not tell anyone of this. When the night passed away, Karna, that offspring of the sun, with joined hands, smilingly addressed these wise words to King Duryodhana: "No dead man conquereth his foes, it is when he is alive that he can see his good. Where is the good of the dead person? And, O Kauravya, where is his victory? Therefore, this is no time for grief, or fear, or death." And having, with his arms embraced that mighty armed one, he further said, "Rise up, O king. Why dost thou lie down? Why dost thou grieve, O slayer of foes? Having afflicted thy enemies by thy prowess, why dost thou wish for death? Or, perhaps, fear hath possessed thee at the sight of Arjuna's prowess. I truly promise unto thee that I will slay Arjuna in battle. O Lord of men, I swear by my weapon that when the 3 and 10 years shall have passed away, I will bring the sons of Pritha under thy subjection." Thus addressed by Karna, and remembering the words of the Daityas and supplications made by them, his brothers, Suddhodana rose up. And having heard those words of the Daityas, that tiger among men, with a firm resolve in his heart arrayed his army, abounding in horses and elephants and cars and infantry. And, O monarch, immensely swarming with white umbrellas, and pennons, and white chamaras, and cars, and elephants, and foot soldiers, that mighty army, as it moved like the waters of the Ganga, looked graceful like the firmament, at a season when the clouds have dispersed and the signs of autumn have been but partially developed. And, O foremost of kings, eulogized like a monarch by the best of the Brahmanas, blessing with victory, that lord of men Suddhodana, Dhritarashtra's son, receiving honors paid with innumerable joying palms, and flaming in exceeding splendor, went in the front, accompanied by Karna, and that gambler, the son of Suvala. And all his brothers with Dusasana at their head, and Burasrava, and Somadatta, and the mighty king Valaka, followed that lion among kings on his way, with cars of various forms, and horses, and the best of elephants. And, O prime among monarchs, in a short time, those perpetuators of the Kuru race entered their own city. Footnotes 499:1 lit. Soldiers that have sworn to conquer or die. A full Akshahini of these soldiers was owned by Krishna, who gave them to Duryodhana to fight for him. The story of Krishna's offering to Duryodhana the choice between these soldiers on the one side, and himself sworn not to fight but only to aid with his counsels on the other, is given in full in the Udyoga Parva. Duryodhana, from folly, accepted the former, who were all slain by Arjuna. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 251. Janamejaya said, "When the high-souled sons of Pritha were living in the forest, what did those foremost of men and mighty archers the sons of Dhritarashtra do? And what did the offspring of the sun, Karna, and the mighty Sakuni, and Bhishma, and Drona, and Kripa do? It behoveth thee to relate this unto me." Vaisampayana said, "When, O mighty king, in this manner the Pandavas had gone, leaving Suddhodana, and when, having been liberated by Pandu's sons, he had come to Hastinapura, Bhishma said these words to the son of Dhritarashtra: O child, I had told thee before, when thou wert intent upon going to the hermitage, that thy journey did not please me. But thou didst do so. And as a consequence, O hero, wert thou forcibly taken captive by the enemy, and wert delivered by the Pandavas versed in morality. Yet art thou not ashamed? Even in the presence of thee, O son of Gandhari, together with thy army, did the Suta's son, struck with panic, fly from the battle of the Gandharvas, O king. And, O foremost of kings, O son of the monarch. While thou with thy army wert crying distressfully, thou didst witness the prowess of the high-souled Pandavas, and also, O mighty armed one, of the wicked son of the Sutta, Karna. O best of kings, whether in the science of arms, or heroism, or morality, Karna, O thou devoted to virtue, is not a fourth part of the Pandavas. Therefore, for the welfare of this race, the conclusion of peace is, I think, desirable with the high-souled Pandavas. Having been thus addressed by Bhishma, Dhritarashtra's son the king laughed a good deal, and then suddenly sailed out with the son of Suvala. Thereupon, knowing that he was gone, those mighty bowmen with Karna and Dusasana at their head followed the highly powerful son of Dhritarashtra. And seeing them gone, Bhishma, the grandfather of the Kurus, hung down his head from shame, and then, O king, went to his own quarters. And, O mighty monarch, when Bhishma had left, that lord of men, Dhritarashtra's son, came there again, and began to consult with his counselors, what is it that is good for me? What remaineth to be done? And how we can most effectively bring about the good we shall discuss today. Karna said, O Kuru's son, Duryodhana, do thou lay to heart thy words that I say. Bhishma always blameth us, and praiseth the Pandavas. And from the ill will he beareth towards thee, he hateth me also. And, O Lord of men, in thy presence he ever crieth me down. I shall never, O Bharata, bear these words that Bhishma had said in thy presence in relation to this matter, extolling the Pandavas, and censuring thee, O repressor of foes. Do thou, O king, enjoin on me, together with servants, forces, and cars. I shall, O monarch, conquer the earth furnished with mountains and woods and forests. The earth had been conquered by the four powerful Pandavas. I shall, without doubt, conquer it for thee single-handed. Let that wretch of the Kuru race, the exceedingly wicked-minded Bhishma, see it, he who vilifies those that do not deserve censure, and praises those that should not be praised. Let him this day witness my might, and blame himself. Do thou, O king, command me. Victory shall surely be thine. By my weapon, O monarch, I swear this before thee. O king, O bull of the Bharata race, hearing those words of Karna, that lord of men, experiencing the highest delight, spoke unto Karna, saying, I am blessed. I have been favored by thee, since thou, endued with great strength, art ever intent on my welfare. My life hath borne fruit, today. As thou, O hero, intendest to subdue all our enemies, repair thou. May good betide thee. Do thou command me what I am to do, O subduer of foes. Having been thus addressed by Dhritarashtra's intelligent son, Karna ordered all the necessaries for the excursion. And on an auspicious lunar day, at an auspicious moment, and under the influence of a star presided over by an auspicious deity, that mighty bowman, having been honored by twice-born ones, and been bathed with auspicious and holy substances, and also worshipped by speech, set out, filling with the rattle of his car the three worlds, with their mobile and immobile objects. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 252. Vyasa continued, Then, O bull among the Bharatas, that mighty bowman, Karna, surrounded by a large army, besieged the beautiful city of Drupada. And he, after a hard conflict, brought the hero under subjection, and, O best of monarchs, made Drupada contribute silver and gold and gems, and also pay tribute. And, O foremost of kings, having subdued him, Karna brought under subjection those princes that were under him, Drupada, and made them pay tribute. Then going to the north, he subdued the sovereigns of that quarter, and having effected the defeat of Bhagadata, Ratha's son ascended that mighty mountain Himavat, all along fighting his foes. And ranging all sides, he conquered and brought under subjection all the kings inhabiting the Himavat, and made them pay dues. Then descending from the mountain and rushing to the east, he reduced the Amgas, and the Bungas, and the Kalingas, and the Mandikas, and the Magadhas, the Karkakandas, and also included with them the Avasiras, Yadiyas, and the Ahikshatras. Having, thus, conquered the eastern quarter, Karna then presented himself before Vatsabhumi. And having taken Vatsabhumi, he reduced Kavali, and Riddhakavati, and Mohana, and Patrana, and Tripura, and Kosala, and compelled all these to pay tribute. Then going to the south, Karna vanquished the mighty charioteers of that quarter, and in Dakshinadya, the Suta's son entered into conflict with Rukmi. After having fought dreadfully, Rukmi spake to the Suta's son, saying, O foremost of monarchs, I have been pleased with thy might and prowess. I shall not do thee wrong, I have only fulfilled the vow of a Kshatriya. Gladly will I give thee as many gold coins as thou desirest. Having met with Rukmi, Karna repaired to Pundya and the mountain, Sri. And by fighting, he made Kerala, King Nila, Venudari's son, and other best of kings living in the southern direction pay tribute. Then going to Sisupala's son, the son of the Suta defeated him, and that highly powerful one also brought under his sway all the neighboring rulers. And, O bull of the Bharata race, having subjugated the Avantis and concluded peace with them, and having met with the Vrishnis, he conquered the west. And, having come to the quarter of Varana, he made all the Yavana and Varvara kings pay tribute. And, having conquered the entire earth east, west, north and south, that hero without any aid brought under subjection all the nations of the Mlechchas, the Mountaineers, the Bhadras, the Rohitakas, the Agneyas and the Malavas. And, having conquered the mighty charioteers, headed by the Nagnajitas, the Suta's son brought the Sasakas and the Yavnas under his sway. Having thus conquered and brought under his subjection the world, the mighty charioteer and tiger among men came back to Hastinapura. That lord of men, Dhritarashtra's son, accompanied by his father and brothers and friends, came to that mighty bowman who had arrived, and duly paid homage unto Karna, crowned with martial merit. And the king proclaimed his feats, saying, What I have not received from either Bhishma, or Drona, or Kripa, or Valaka, I have received from thee. May good betide thee. What need of speaking at length? Hear my words, O Karna. In thee, O chief of men, I have my refuge. O mighty armed one. O tiger among men, without doubt all the Pandavas and the other kings crowned with prosperity come not to a 16th part of thee. Do thou, O mighty bowman, O Karna, see Dhritarashtra and the illustrious Gandhari as the bearer of the thunderbolt did Aditi. Then, O king, there arose in the city of Hastinapura a clamor and sounds of O and alas. And, O lord of men, some of the kings praised him, Karna, while others censured him, while others, again, remained silent. Having thus, O foremost of monarchs, in a short time conquered this earth furnished with mountains and forests and skies, and with oceans and fields, and filled with high and low tracts, and cities, and replete also with islands. O Lord of earth, and brought the monarchs under subjection, and having gained imperishable wealth, the Suta's son appeared before the king. Then, O repressor of foes, entering into the interior of the palace, that hero saw Dhritarashtra with Gandhari, O tiger among men, that one conversant with morality took hold of his feet even like a son. And Dhritarashtra embraced him affectionately, and then dismissed him. Ever since that time, O monarch, O Bharata, King Duryodhana and Sakuni, the son of Suvala, thought that Pritha's sons had already been defeated in battle by Karna. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 253. Vysampayana continued, O king, O lord of men, that slayer of hostile heroes, the Suta's son, said these words to Duryodhana, O Kaurava Duryodhana, do thou lay unto thy heart the words that I shall tell thee, and, O repressor of foes, after having heard my words, it behoveth thee to act accordingly every way. Now, O best of monarchs, O hero, hath the earth been rid of foes. Do thou rule her even like the mighty-minded Sakra himself, having his foes destroyed. Vysampayana continued, having been thus addressed by Karna, the king again spake unto him, saying, O bull among men, nothing whatever is unattainable to him who hath thee for refuge, and to whom thou art attached, and on whose welfare thou art entirely intent. Now, I have a purpose, which do thou truly listen to. Having beheld that foremost of sacrifices, the mighty Rajasuya, performed by the Pandavas, a desire hath sprung up in me, to celebrate the same. Do thou, O Suta's son, fulfill this desire of mine. Thus addressed, Karna spake thus unto the king, Now that all the rulers of the earth have been brought under thy subjection, do thou summon the principal Brahmanas, and, O best of Kurus, duly procure the articles required for the sacrifice. And, O repressor of foes, let Ritwijas as prescribed, and versed in the Vedas, celebrate thy rites according to the ordinance, O king. And, O bull of the Bharata race, let thy great sacrifice also, abounding in meats and drinks, and grand with parts, commence. O king, having been thus addressed by Karna, Dhritarashtra's son summoned the priest, and spake unto him these words, Do thou duly and in proper order celebrate for me that best of sacrifices, the Rajasuya furnished with excellent dakshinas. Thus accosted, that best of Brahmanas spake unto the king, saying, O foremost of the Kauravas, while Yudhishthira is living, that best of sacrifices cannot be performed in thy family, O prince of kings. Further, O monarch, thy father Dhritarashtra, endued with long life, liveth. For this reason also, O best of kings, this sacrifice cannot be undertaken by thee. There is, O Lord, another great sacrifice, resembling the Rajasuya. Do thou, O foremost of kings, celebrate that sacrifice. Listen to these words of mine. All these rulers of the earth, who have, O king, become tributary to thee, will pay thee tribute in gold, both pure and impure. Of that gold, do thou, O best of monarchs, now make the sacrificial plow, and do thou, O Bharata, plow the sacrificial compound with it. At that spot, let there commence, O foremost of kings, with due rites, and without any disturbance the sacrifice, sanctified with mantras abounding in edibles. The name of that sacrifice worthy of virtuous persons is Vaishnava. No person save the ancient Vishnu hath performed it before. This mighty sacrifice vies with that best of sacrifices the Rajasuya itself. And, further, it liketh us and it is also for thy welfare, to celebrate it. And, moreover, it is capable of being celebrated without any disturbance. By undertaking this, thy desire will be fulfilled. Having been thus addressed by those Brahmanas, Dhritarashtra's son, the king, spake these words to Karna, his brothers, and the son of Suvala, Beyond doubt, the words of the Brahmanas are entirely liked by me. If they are relished by you also, express it without delay. Thus appealed, they all said unto the king, So be it. Then the king one by one appointed persons to their respective tasks, and desired all the artisans to construct the sacrificial plow. And, O best of kings, all that had been commanded to be done was gradually executed. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 254. Vaisampayana continued, Then all the artisans, the principal counselors, and the highly wise Vidura said unto Dhritarashtra's son, All the preparations for the excellent sacrifice have been made, O king, and the time also hath come, O Bharata. And the exceedingly precious golden plough hath been constructed. Hearing this, O monarch, that best of kings, Dhritarashtra's son commanded that prime among sacrifices to be commenced. Then commenced that sacrifice sanctified by mantras, and abounding in edibles, and the son of Gandhari was duly initiated according to the ordinance. And Dhritarashtra, and the illustrious Vidura, and Bhishma, and Drona, and Kripa, and Karna, and the celebrated Gandhari experienced great delight. And, O foremost of kings, Duryodhana dispatched swift messengers to invite the princes and the Brahmanas. And mounting fleet vehicles they went to the respective directions assigned to them. Then to a certain messenger on the point of setting out, Dusasana said, Go thou speedily to the woods of Dwaita, and in that forest duly invite the Brahmanas and those wicked persons, the Pandavas. Thereupon, he repaired thither, and bowing down to all the Pandavas, said, having acquired immense wealth by his native prowess, that best of kings and foremost of Kurus, Duryodhana, O monarch, is celebrating a sacrifice. Thither are going from various directions the kings and the Brahmanas. O king, I have been sent by the high-souled Kaurava. That king and lord of men, Dhritarashtra's son, invites you. It behoveth you, therefore, to witness the delightful sacrifice of that monarch. Hearing these words of the messenger, that tiger among kings, the royal Yudhishthira, said, By good luck it is that enhancer of the glory of his ancestors, King Suyoddhana, is celebrating this best of sacrifices. We should certainly repair thither, but we cannot do now, for till the completion of the 13th year, we shall have to observe our vow. Hearing this speech of Yudhishthira the just, Bhima said these words, then will King Yudhishthira the just go thither, when he will cast him, Duryodhana, into the fire kindled by weapons. Do thou say unto Suddhodana, when after the expiration of the 13th year, that lord of men, the Pandava, will, in the sacrifice of battle, pour upon the Dhritarashtra's the clarified butter of his ire, then will I come. But the other Pandavas, O king, did not say anything unpleasant. The messenger, on his return, related unto Dhritarashtra's son all as it had fallen out. Then there came to the city of Dhritarashtra many foremost of men, lords of various countries, and highly virtuous Brahmanas. And duly received in order according to the ordinance, those lords of men experienced great delight and were all well pleased. And that foremost among monarchs Dhritarashtra, surrounded by all the Kauravas, experienced the height of joy, and spake unto Vidura, saying, do thou, O Kshata, speedily so act that all persons in the sacrificial compound may be served with food, be refreshed and satisfied. Thereupon, O repressor of foes, assenting to that order, the learned Vidura, versed in morality, cheerfully entertained all the orders in proper measure with meat and beverages to eat and drink, and fragrant garland and various kinds of attire. And having constructed pavilions, for their accommodation, that hero and foremost of kings, duly entertained the princes and the Brahmanas by thousands, and also bestowing upon them wealth of various kinds, bade them farewell. And having dismissed all the kings, he entered Hastinapura, surrounded by his brothers, and in company with Karna and Suvala's son. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 255. Vyasa said, while, O great king, Duryodhana was entering the city, the panegyrists eulogized the prince of unfailing prowess. And others also eulogized that mighty bowman and foremost of kings. And sprinkling over him fried paddy and sandal paste, the citizens said, by good luck it is, O king, that thy sacrifice hath been completed without obstruction. And some, more reckless of speech, that were present there, said unto that lord of the earth, surely this thy sacrifice cannot be compared with Yudhishthira's, nor doth this come up to a 16th part of that sacrifice. Thus spake unto that king some that were reckless of consequences. His friends, however, said, this sacrifice of thine hath surpassed all others. Yayati and Nahusha, and Mandhata and Bharata, having been sanctified by celebrating such a sacrifice, have all gone to heaven. Hearing such agreeable words from his friends, that monarch, O bull of the Bharata's race, well pleased, entered the city and finally his own abode. Then, O king, worshipping the feet of his father and mother and of others headed by Bhishma, Drona and Kripa, and of the wise Vidura, and worshipped in turn by his younger brothers, that delighter of brothers sat down upon an excellent seat, surrounded by the latter. And the Suda's son, rising up, said, by good luck it is, O foremost of the Bharata race, that this mighty sacrifice of thine hath been brought to a close. When, however, the sons of Pritha shall have been slain in battle, and thou wilt have completed the Rajasuya sacrifice, once again, O Lord of men, shall I honor thee thus. Then that mighty king, the illustrious son of Dhritarashtra, replied unto him, truly hath this been spoken by thee. When, O foremost of men, the wicked-minded Pandavas have been slain, and when also the grand Rajasuya hath been celebrated by me, then thou shalt again, O hero, honor me thus. And having said this, O Bharata, the Kaurava embraced Karna, and began, O mighty king, to think of the Rajasuya, that foremost of sacrifices. And that best of kings also addressed the Kurus around him, saying, when shall I, ye Kauravas, having slain all the Pandavas, celebrate that costly and foremost of sacrifices, the Rajasuya? Then spake Karna unto him, saying, hear me, O elephant among kings. So long as I do not slay Arjuna, I shall not allow any one to wash my feet, nor shall I taste meat. And I shall observe the Azura vow, and whoever may solicit me for anything, I never shall say, I have it not. When Karna had thus vowed to slay Phalguna in battle, those mighty charioteers and bowmen, the sons of Dhritarashtra, sent up a loud cheer, and Dhritarashtra's sons thought that the Pandavas had already been conquered. Then that chief of kings, the graceful Duryodhana, leaving those bulls among men, entered his apartment, like the Lord Kuvara entering the garden of Kshatrartha. And all those mighty bowmen also, O Bharata, went to their respective quarters. Meanwhile, those mighty bowmen, the Pandavas, excited by the words the messenger had spoken, became anxious, and they did not, from that time, experience the least happiness. Intelligence, further, O foremost of kings, had been brought by spies regarding the vow of the Suta's son to slay Vijaya. Hearing this, O Lord of men, Dharma's son became exceedingly anxious. And considering Karna of the impenetrable male to be of wonderful prowess, and remembering all their woes, he knew no peace. And that high-souled one, filled with anxiety, made up his mind to abandon the woods about Dwaitavana abounding with ferocious animals. Meanwhile, the royal son of Dhritarashtra began to rule the earth, along with his heroic brothers, as also with Bhishma and Drona and Kripa. And with the assistance of the Suta's son crowned with martial glory, Duryodhana remained ever intent on the welfare of the rulers of the earth, and he worshipped the foremost of Brahmanas by celebrating sacrifices with profuse gifts. And that hero and subduer of foes, O king, was engaged in doing good to his brothers, concluding for certain in his mind that giving and enjoying are the only use of riches. Footnotes 506:1 The vow of the Asuras was, according to the Burdwan Pundits, never to drink wine. It is more rational to suppose that Karna swears to give up the refined manners and practices of the Aryas and adopt those of the Asuras till the consummation of the cherished desire. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 256. Janamejaya said, after having delivered Duryodhana, "What did the mighty sons of Pandu do in that forest? It behoveth thee to tell me this." Vaisampayana said, "Once on a time, as Yudhishthira lay down at night in the Dwaita woods, some deer, with accents choked in tears, presented themselves before him in his dreams. To them standing with joined hands, their bodies trembling all over, that foremost of monarchs said, 'Tell me what ye wish to say. Who are ye? And what do ye desire?' Thus accosted by Kunti's son, the illustrious Pandava, those deer, the remnant of those that had been slaughtered, replied unto him, saying, 'We are, O Bharata, those deer that are still alive after them that had been slaughtered. We shall be exterminated totally. Therefore, do thou change thy residence. O mighty king, all thy brothers are heroes, conversant with weapons, they have thinned the ranks of the rangers of the forest. We few, the remnants, O mighty-minded one, remain like seed. By thy favor, O King of kings, let us increase.' Seeing these deer, which remained like seed after the rest had been destroyed, trembling and afflicted with fear, Yudhishthira the just was greatly affected with grief. And the king, intent on the welfare of all creatures, said unto them, 'So be it. I shall act as ye have said.' Awaking after such a vision, that excellent king, moved by pity towards the deer, thus spake unto his brothers assembled there, 'Those deer that are alive after them that have been slaughtered, accosted me at night, after I had awakened, saying, We remain like the queues of our lines. Blessed be thou. Do thou have compassion on us. And they have spoken truly. We ought to feel pity for the dwellers of the forest. We have been feeding on them for a year together and 8 months. Let us, therefore, again, repair to the romantic Kamayakas, that best of forests abounding in wild animals, situated at the head of the desert, near Lake Trinavindu. And there let us pleasantly pass the rest of our time.' Then, O king, the Pandavas, versed in morality, swiftly departed thence, accompanied by the Brahmanas and all those that lived with them, and followed by Indrasena and other retainers. And proceeding along the roads walked by travelers, furnished with excellent corn and clear water, they at length beheld the sacred asylum of Kamayaka endued with ascetic merit. And as pious men enter the celestial regions, those foremost of the Bharata race, the Kauravas, surrounded by those bulls among Brahmanas, entered that forest. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 257. Vaisampayana continued, dwelling in the woods, O bull of the Bharata race, the high-souled Pandavas spent 1 and 10 years in a miserable plight. And although deserving of happiness, those foremost of men, brooding over their circumstances, passed their days miserably, living on fruits and roots. And that royal sage, the mighty armed Yudhishthira, reflecting that the extremity of misery that had befallen his brothers was owing to his own fault, and remembering those sufferings that had arisen from his act of gambling, could not sleep peacefully. And he felt as if his heart had been pierced with a lance. And remembering the harsh words of the Suta's son, the Pandava, repressing the venom of his wrath, passed his time in humble guise, sighing heavily. And Arjuna, and both the twins, and the illustrious Draupadi, and the mighty Bhimahi that was strongest of all men experienced the most poignant pain in casting their eyes on Yudhishthira. And thinking that a short time only remained of their exile, those bulls among men, influenced by rage and hope and by resorting to various exertions and endeavors, made their bodies assume almost different shapes. After a little while, that mighty ascetic, Vyasa, the son of Satyavati, came there to see the Pandavas. And seeing him approach, Kunti's son, Yudhishthira, stepped forward and duly received that high-souled one. And having gratified Vyasa by bowing down unto him, Pandu's son of subdued senses, after the rishi had been seated, sat down before him, desirous of listening to him. And beholding his grandsons lean and living in the forest on the produce of the wilderness, that mighty sage, moved by compassion, said these words, and accents choked in tears, O mighty-armed Yudhishthira, O thou best of virtuous persons, those men that do not perform ascetic austerities never attain great happiness in this world. People experience happiness and misery by turns, for surely, O bull among men, no man ever enjoyeth unbroken happiness. A wise man endued with high wisdom, knowing that life hath its ups and downs, is neither filled with joy nor with grief. When happiness cometh, one should enjoy it. When misery cometh, one should bear it, as a sower of crops must bide his season. Nothing is superior to asceticism. By asceticism one acquireth mighty fruit. Do thou know, O Bharata, that there is nothing that asceticism cannot achieve. Truth, sincerity, freedom from anger, justice, self-control, restraint of the faculties, immunity from malice, guilelessness, sanctity, and mortification of the senses, these, O mighty monarch, purify a person of meritorious acts. Foolish persons addicted to vice and bestial ways attain to brutish births in after life and never enjoy happiness. The fruit of acts done in this world is reaped in the next. Therefore should one restrain his body by asceticism and the observance of vows. And, O king, free from guile and with a cheerful spirit, one should, according to his power, bestow gifts, after going down to the recipient and paying him homage. A truth-telling person attaineth a life devoid of trouble. A person void of anger attaineth sincerity, and one free from malice acquireth supreme contentment. A person who hath subdued his senses and his inner faculties never knoweth tribulation, nor is a person of subdued senses affected by sorrow at the height of others' prosperity. A man who giveth everyone his due, and the bestower of boons, attain happiness, and come by every object of enjoyment, while a man free from envy reapeth perfect ease. He that honoreth those to whom honor is due, attaineth birth in an illustrious line, and he that hath subdued his senses never cometh by misfortune. A man whose mind followeth good, after having paid his debt to nature, is on this account born again endued with a righteous mind. Yudhishthira said, O eminently virtuous one, O mighty sage, of the bestowal of gifts and the observance of asceticism, which is of greater efficacy in the next world, and which, harder of practice? Vyasa said, There is nothing, O child, in this world harder to practice than charity. Men greatly thirst after wealth, and wealth also is gotten with difficulty. Nay, renouncing even dear life itself, heroic men, O magnanimous one, enter into the depths of the sea and the forest for the sake of wealth. For wealth, some betake themselves to agriculture and the tending of kine, and some enter into servitude. Therefore, it is extremely difficult to part with wealth that is obtained with such trouble. Since nothing is harder to practice than charity, therefore, in my opinion, even the bestowal of boons is superior to everything. Specially is this to be borne in mind that well-earned gains should, in proper time and place, be given away to pious men. But the bestowal of ill-gotten gains can never rescue the giver from the evil of rebirth. It hath been declared, O Yudhishthira, that by bestowing, in a pure spirit, even a slight gift in due time and to a fit recipient, a man attaineth inexhaustible fruit in the next world. In this connection is instanced the old story regarding the fruit obtained by Mudgala for having given away only a drona of corn. Footnotes 509:1 A very small measure. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 258. Yudhishthira said, "Why did that high-souled one give away a drona of corn? And, O eminently pious one, to whom and in what prescribed way did he give it? Do thou tell me this? Surely, I consider the life of that virtuous person as having borne fruit with whose practices the possessor himself of the 6 attributes, witnessing everything, was well pleased." Vyasa said, "There lived, O king, in Kurukshetra a virtuous man, sage, Mudgala by name. And he was truthful, and free from malice, and of subdued senses. And he used to lead the sila and uncha modes of life. And although living like a pigeon, yet that one of mighty austerities entertained his guests, celebrated the sacrifice called Istakrita, and performed other rites. And that sage together with his son and wife ate for a fortnight, and during the other fortnight led the life of a pigeon, collecting a drona of corn. And celebrating the Darsa and Purnamasia sacrifices, that one devoid of guile used to pass his days by taking the food that remained after the deities and the guests had eaten. And on auspicious lunar days, that Lord of the 3 worlds, Indra himself, accompanied by the celestials used, O mighty monarch, to partake of the food offered at his sacrifice. And that one, having adopted the life of a muni, with a cheerful heart entertained his guests also with food on such days. And as that high-souled one distributed his food with alacrity, the remainder of the drona of corn increased as soon as a guest appeared. And by virtue of the pure spirit in which the sage gave away, that food of his increased so much that hundreds upon hundreds of learned brahmanas were fed with it. And, O king, it came to pass that having heard of the virtuous Mudgala observant of vows, the Muni Durvasa, having space alone for his covering, his accoutrements worn like that of maniac, and his head bare of hair, came there, uttering, O Pandava, various insulting words. And having arrived there, that best of Munis said unto the Brahmana, "Know thou, O foremost of Brahmanas, that I have come hither seeking for food." Thereupon Mudgala said unto the sage, "Thou art welcome." And then offering to that maniac of an ascetic affected by hunger, water to wash his feet and mouth, that one observant of the vow of feeding guests, respectfully placed before him excellent fare. Affected by hunger, the frantic rishi completely exhausted the food that had been offered unto him. Thereupon, Mudgala furnished him again with food. Then having eaten up all that food, he besmeared his body with the unclean orts and went away as he had come. In this manner, during the next season, he came again and ate up all the food supplied by that wise one leading the uncha mode of life. Thereupon, without partaking any food himself, the sage Mudgala again became engaged in collecting corn, following the uncha mode. Hunger could not disturb his equanimity. Nor could anger, nor guile, nor a sense of degradation, nor agitation, enter into the heart of that best of Brahmanas leading the uncha mode of life along with his son and his wife. In this way, Durvasa, having made up his mind, during successive seasons presented himself for 6 several times before that best of sages living according to the uncha mode, yet that Muni could not perceive any agitation in Mudgala's heart, and he found the pure heart of the pure-souled ascetic always pure. Thereupon, well pleased, the sage addressed Mudgala, saying, "There is not another guileless and charitable being like thee on earth. The pangs of hunger drive away to a distance the sense of righteousness and deprive people of all patience. The tongue, loving delicacies, attracteth men towards them. Life is sustained by food. The mind, moreover, is fickle, and it is hard to keep it in subjection. The concentration of the mind and of the senses surely constitutes ascetic austerities. It must be hard to renounce in a pure spirit a thing earned by pains. Yet, O pious one, all this hath been duly achieved by thee. In thy company we feel obliged and gratified. Self-restraint, fortitude, justice, control of the senses and of faculties, mercy, and virtue, all these are established in thee. Thou hast by the deeds conquered the different worlds and have thereby obtained admission into paths of beatitude. Ah! Even the dwellers of heaven are proclaiming thy mighty deeds of charity. O thou observant of vows, thou shalt go to heaven even in thine own body. Whilst the Muni Durvasa was speaking thus, a celestial messenger appeared before Mudgala, upon a car yoked with swans and cranes, hung with a neat work of bells, scented with divine fragrance, painted picturesquely, and possessed of the power of going everywhere at will. And he addressed the Brahmana sage, saying, O sage, do thou ascend into this chariot earned by thy acts. Thou hast attained the fruit of thy asceticism. As the messenger of the gods was speaking thus, the sage told him, O divine messenger, I desire that thou mayst describe unto me the attributes of those that reside there. What are their austerities, and what their purposes? And, O messenger of the gods, what constitutes happiness in heaven, and what are the disadvantages thereof? It is declared by virtuous men of good lineage that friendship with pious people is contracted by only walking with them 7 paces. O Lord, in the name of that friendship I ask thee, do thou without hesitation tell me the truth, and that which is good for me now. Having heard thee, I shall, according to thy words, ascertain the course I ought to follow. Footnotes 510:1 Picking up for support, 1. Ears of corn and 2. Individual grains, left on the field by husbandmen after they have gathered and carried away the sheaves, are called the sila and the ancha modes of life. 510:2 Naked. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 259. The messenger of the god said, O great sage, thou art of simple understanding, since, having secured that celestial bliss which bringeth great honor, thou art still deliberating like an unwise person. O Muni, that region which is known as heaven existeth there above us. Those regions tower high, and are furnished with excellent paths, and are, O sage, always ranged by celestial cars. Atheists and untruthful persons, those that have not practiced ascetic austerities, and those that have not performed great sacrifices, cannot repair thither. Only men of virtuous souls, and those of subdued spirits, and those that have their faculties in subjection, and those that have controlled their senses, and those that are free from malice, and persons intent on the practice of charity, and heroes, and men bearing marks of battle, after having, with subdued senses and faculties, performed the most meritorious rites, attain those regions, O Brahmana, capable of being obtained only by virtuous acts, and inhabited by pious men. There, O Mudgala, are established separately myriads of beautiful, shining, and resplendent worlds bestowing every object of desire, owned by those celestial beings, the gods, the Sathyas, and the Vaiswas, the great sages, Yamas, and the Dharmas, and the Gandharvas and the Apsaras. And there is that monarch of mountains, the golden Meru, extending over a space of 33,000 yojanas. And there, O Mudgala, are the sacred gardens of the celestials, with Nandana at their head, where sport the persons of meritorious acts. And neither hunger, nor thirst, nor lassitude, nor fear, nor anything that is disgusting or inauspicious is there. And all the odors of that place are delightful, and all the breezes delicious to the touch. And all the sounds there are captivating, O sage, to the ear and the heart. And neither grief, nor decrepitude, nor labor, nor repentance also is there. That world, O Muni, obtained as the fruit of one's own acts, is of this nature. Persons repair thither by virtue of their meritorious deeds. And the persons of those that dwell there look resplendent, and this, O Mudgala, solely by virtue of their own acts, and not owing to the merits of father or mothers. And there is neither sweat, nor stench, nor urine there. And there, O Muni, dust doth not soils one's garments. And their excellent garlands, redolent of divine fragrance, never fade. And, O Brahmana, they yoke such cars as this, that I have brought. And, O mighty sage, devoid of envy and grief and fatigue and ignorance and malice, men who have attained heaven dwell in those regions happily. And, O bull among munis, higher and higher over such regions there are others endued with higher celestial virtues. Of these, the beautiful and resplendent regions of Brahma are the foremost. Thither, O Brahmana, repair rishis that have been sanctified by meritorious acts. And there dwell certain beings named Ribus. They are the gods of the gods themselves. Their regions are supremely blessed, and are adored even by the deities. These shine by their own light, and bestow every object of desire. They suffer no pangs that women might cause, do not possess worldly wealth, and are free from guile. The rebus do not subsist on oblations, nor yet on ambrosia. And they are endued with such celestial forms that they cannot be perceived by the senses. And these eternal gods of the celestials do not desire happiness for happiness' sake, nor do they change at the revolution of a kalpa. Where, indeed, is their decrepitude or dissolution? For them there is neither ecstasy, nor joy, nor happiness. They have neither happiness nor misery. Wherefore should they have anger or aversion then, O Muni? O Mudgala, their supreme state is coveted even by the gods. And that crowning emancipation, hard to attain, can never be acquired by people subject to desire. The number of those deities is 33. To their regions repair wise men, after having observed excellent vows, or bestowed gifts according to the ordinance. Thou also hast easily acquired that success by thy charities. Do thou, by effulgence displayed by virtue of thy ascetic austerities, enjoy that condition obtained by thy meritorious acts. Such, O Brahmana, is the bliss of heaven containing various worlds. Thus have I described unto thee the blessing of the celestial regions. Do thou now hear from me some of the disadvantages thereof? That in the celestial regions a person, while reaping the fruit of the acts he hath already performed, cannot be engaged in any others, and that he must enjoy the consequences of the former until they are completely exhausted, and, further, that he is subject to fall after he hath entirely exhausted his merit, form, in my opinion, the disadvantages of heaven. The fall of a person whose mind hath been steeped in happiness must, O Mudgala, be pronounced as a fault. And the discontent and regret that must follow one's stay at an inferior seat after one hath enjoyed more auspicious and brighter regions must be hard to bear. And the consciousness of those about to fall is stupefied and also agitated by emotions. And as the garlands of those about to fall fade away, fear invadeth their hearts. These mighty drawbacks, O Mudgala, extend even to the regions of Brahma. In the celestial regions, the virtues of men who have performed righteous acts are countless. And, O Muni, this is another of the attributes of the fallen that, by reason of their merits, they take birth among men. And then they attain to high fortune and happiness. If one, however, cannot acquire knowledge here, one cometh by an inferior birth. The fruits of acts done in this world are reaped in the next. This world, O Brahmana, hath been declared to be one of acts, the others as one of fruit. Thus have I, O Mudgala, asked by thee, described all unto thee. Now, O pious one, with thy favor, we shall easily set out with speed. Vyasa continued, having heard this speech, Mudgala began to reflect in his mind. And having deliberated well, that best of Munis spake thus unto the celestial messenger, O messenger of the gods, I bow unto thee. Do thou, O sire, depart in peace. I have nothing to do with either happiness or heaven having such prominent defects. Persons who enjoy heaven suffer, after all, huge misery and extreme regret in this world. Therefore, I do not desire heaven. I shall seek for that unfailing region repairing whither people have not to lament, or to be pained, or agitated. Thou hast described unto me these great defects belonging to the celestial regions. Do thou now describe unto me a region free from faults. Thereupon the celestial messenger said, Above the abode of Brahma, there is the supreme seat of Vishnu, pure, and eternal, and luminous, known by the name of Parabrahma. Thither, O Brahmana, cannot repair persons who are attached to the objects of the senses, nor can those subject to arrogance, covetousness, ignorance, anger, and envy go to that place. It is only those that are free from affection, and those free from pride, and those free from conflicting emotions, and those that have restrained their senses, and those given to contemplation and yoga, that can repair thither. Having heard these words, the Muni bade farewell to the celestial messenger, and that virtuous one leading the Uncha mode of life assumed perfect contentment. And then praise and dispraise became equal unto him, and a brickbat, stone, and gold assumed the same aspect in his eyes. And availing himself of the means of attaining Brahma, he became always engaged in meditation. And having obtained power by means of knowledge, and acquired excellent understanding, he attained that supreme state of emancipation which is regarded as eternal. Therefore, thou also, O Kunti's son, ought not to grieve. Deprived thou hast truly been of a flourishing kingdom, but thou wilt regain it by thy ascetic austerities. Misery after happiness, and happiness after misery, revolve by turns round a man even like the point of a wheel's circumference round the axle. After the 13th year hath passed away, thou wilt, O thou of immeasurable might, get back the kingdom possessed before thee by thy father and grandfather. Therefore, let the fever of thy heart depart. Vaisampayana continued. Having said this to Pandu's son, the worshipful Vyasa went back to his hermitage for the purpose of performing austerities. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 260. Janamejaya said, while the high-souled Pandavas were living in those woods, delighted with the pleasant conversation they held with the Munis, and engaged in distributing the food they obtained from the sun, with various kinds of venison to Brahmanas and others that came to them for edibles till the hour of Krishna's meal, how, O great Muni, did Duryodhana and the other wicked and sinful sons of Dhritarashtra, guided by the counsels of Dasasana, Karna, and Sakuni, deal with them? I ask thee this. Do thou, worshipful sir, enlighten me. Vaisampayana said, when, O great king, Duryodhana heard that the Pandavas were living as happily in the woods as in a city, he longed, with the artful Karna, Dasasana, and others, to do them harm. And while those evil-minded persons were employed in concerting various wicked designs, the virtuous and celebrated ascetic Durvasa, following the bent of his own will, arrived at the city of the Kurus with 10,000 disciples. And seeing the irascible ascetic arrived, Duryodhana and his brothers welcomed him with great humility, self-abasement, and gentleness. And himself attending on the rishi as a menial, the prince gave him a right worshipful reception. And the illustrious Muni stayed there for a few days, while King Duryodhana, watchful of his imprecations, attended on him diligently by day and night. And sometimes the Muni would say, I am hungry, O king, give me some food quickly. And sometimes he would go out for a bath and, returning at a late hour, would say, I shall not eat anything today as I have no appetite, and so saying would disappear from his sight. And sometimes, coming all on a sudden, he would say, feed us quickly. And at other times, bent on some mischief, he would awake at midnight and having caused his meals to be prepared as before, would carp at them and not partake of them at all. And trying the prince in this way for a while, when the Muni found that the king Duryodhana was neither angered nor annoyed, he became graciously inclined towards him. And then, O Bharata, the intractable Durvasa said unto him, I have power to grant thee boons. Thou mayst ask of me whatever lies nearest to thy heart. May good fortune be thine. Pleased as I am with thee, thou mayst obtain from me anything that is not opposed to religion and morals. Vaisampayana continued, hearing these words of the great ascetic, Suddhodana felt himself to be inspired with new life. Indeed, it had been agreed upon between himself and Karna and Dasasana as to what the boon should be that he would ask of the Muni if the latter were pleased with his reception. And the evil-minded king, bethinking himself of what had previously been decided, joyfully solicited the following favor, saying, the great king Yudhishthira is the eldest and the best of our race. That pious man is now living in the forest with his brothers. Do thou, therefore, once become the guest of that illustrious one, even as, O Brahmana, thou hast with thy disciples been mine for some time. If thou art minded to do me a favor, do thou go unto him at a time when that delicate and excellent lady, the celebrated princess of Panchala, after having regaled with food the Brahmanas, her husbands and herself, may lie down to rest. The rishi replied, even so shall I act for thy satisfaction. And having said this to Suddhodana, that great Brahmana, Durvasa, went away in the very same state in which he had come. And Suddhodana regarded himself to have attained all the objects of his desire. And holding Karna by the hand he expressed great satisfaction. And Karna, too, joyfully addressed the king in the company of his brothers, saying, by a piece of singular good luck, thou hast fared well and attained the objects of thy desire. And by good luck it is that thy enemies have been immersed in a sea of dangers that is difficult to cross. The sons of Pandu are now exposed to the fire of Durvasa's wrath. Through their own fault they have fallen into an abyss of darkness. Vyasa continued, O king, expressing their satisfaction in this strain, Duryodhana and others, bent on evil machinations, returned merrily to their respective homes. Draupadi Harana Parva. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 261. Vyasa said, one day, having previously ascertained that the Pandavas were all seated at their ease and that Krishna was reposing herself after her meal, the sage Durvasa, surrounded by 10,000 disciples, repaired to that forest. The illustrious and upright King Yudhishthira, seeing that guest arrived, advanced with his mothers to receive him. And joining the palms of his hands and pointing to a proper and excellent seat, he accorded the rishis a fit and respectful welcome. And the king said unto him, Return quick, O adorable sir, after performing thy diurnal ablutions and observances. And that sinless Muni, not knowing how the king would be able to provide a feast for him and his disciples, proceeded with the latter to perform his ablutions. And that host of the Muni, of subdued passions, went into the stream for performing their ablutions. Meanwhile, O king, the excellent Princess Draupadi, devoted to her husbands, was in great anxiety about the food to be provided for the Munis. And when after much anxious thought she came to the conclusion that means there were none for providing a feast, she inwardly prayed to Krishna, the slayer of Kansa. And the princess said, Krishna, O Krishna, of mighty arms, O son of Devki, whose power is inexhaustible, O Vasudeva, O Lord of the universe, who dispellest the difficulties of those that bow down to thee, thou art the soul, the creator and the destroyer of the universe. Thou, O Lord, art inexhaustible and the savior of the afflicted. Thou art the preserver of the universe and of all created beings. Thou art the highest of the high, and the spring of the mental perceptions Akuli and Chidi. O supreme and infinite being, O giver of all good, be thou the refuge of the helpless. O primordial being, incapable of being conceived by the soul or the mental faculties or otherwise, thou art the ruler of all and the Lord of Brahma. I seek thy protection. O God, thou art ever kindly disposed towards those that take refuge in thee. Do thou cherish me with thy kindness? O thou with a complexion dark as the leaves of the blue lotus, and with eyes red as the corolla of the lily, and attired in yellow robes with, besides, the bright Kaustubha gem in thy bosom, thou art the beginning and the end of creation, and the great refuge of all. Thou art the supreme light and essence of the universe. Thy face is directed towards every point. They call thee supreme germ and the depository of all treasures. Under thy protections, O Lord of the gods, all evils lose their terror. As thou didst protect me before from Dusasana, do thou extricate me now from this difficulty. Vyasa continued, the great and sovereign God, and Lord of the earth, of mysterious movements, the Lord Kesva, who is ever kind to the dependents, thou adored by Krishna, and perceiving her difficulty, instantly repaired to that place, leaving the bed of Rukmini, who was sleeping by his side. Beholding Vasudeva, Draupadi bowed down to him in great joy and informed him of the arrival of the Munis and every other thing. And having heard everything, Krishna said unto her, I am very much afflicted with hunger, do thou give me some food without delay, and then thou mayst go about thy work. At these words of Kesva, Krishna became confused, and replied unto him, saying, The sun-given vessel remains full till I finish my meal. But as I have already taken my meal today, there is no food in it now. Then that lotus-eyed and adorable being said unto Krishna, This is no time for jest, O Krishna, I am much distressed with hunger, go thou quickly to fetch the vessel and show it to me. When Kesva, that ornament of the Yadu's race, had the vessel brought unto him with such persistence, he looked into it and saw a particle of rice and vegetable sticking at its rim. And swallowing it, he said unto her, May it please the God Hari, the soul of the universe, and may that God who partaketh at sacrifices be satiated with this. Then the long-armed Krishna, that soother of miseries, said unto Bhimasena, Do thou speedily invite the Munis to dinner. Then, O good king, the celebrated Bhimasena quickly went to invite all those Munis, Durvasa and others, who had gone to the nearest stream of transparent and cool water to perform their ablutions. Meanwhile, these ascetics, having plunged into the river, were rubbing their bodies and observing that they all felt their stomachs to be full. And coming out of the stream, they began to stare at one another. And turning towards Durvasa, all those ascetics observed, having bade the king make our meals ready, we have come hither for a bath. But how, O regenerate Rishi, can we eat anything now, for our stomachs seem to be full to the throat? The repast hath been uselessly prepared for us. What is the best thing to be done now? Durvasa replied, by spoiling the repast, we have done a great wrong to that royal sage, King Yudhishthira. Would not the Pandavas destroy us by looking down upon us with angry eyes? I know the royal sage Yudhishthira to be possessed of great ascetic power. Ye Brahmanas, I am afraid of men that are devoted to Hari. The high-souled Pandavas are all religious men, learned, warlike, diligent in ascetic austerities and religious observances, devoted to Vasudeva, and always observant of rules of good conduct. If provoked, they can consume us with their wrath as fire doth a bale of cotton. Therefore, ye disciples, do ye all run away quickly without seeing them again. Vaisampayana continued, all those Brahmanas, thus advised by their ascetic preceptor, became greatly afraid of the Pandavas and fled away in all directions. Then Bhimasena, not beholding those excellent munis in the celestial river, made a search after them here and there at all the landing places. And learning from the ascetics of those places that they had run away, he came back and informed Yudhishthira of what had happened. Then all the Pandavas of subdued senses, expecting them to come, remained awaiting their arrival for some time. And Yudhishthira said, coming dead of night the rishis will deceive us. Oh how can we escape from this difficulty created by the facts? Seeing them absorbed in such reflections and breathing long deep sighs at frequent intervals, the illustrious Krishna suddenly appeared to them and addressed them these words, knowing, ye sons of Pritha, your danger from that wrathful rishi, I was implored by Draupadi to come, and, therefore, have I come here speedily. But now ye have not the least fear from the rishi Durvasa. Afraid of your ascetic powers, he hath made himself scarce ere this. Virtuous men never suffer. I now ask your permission to let me return home. May you always be prosperous. Vaisampayana continued, hearing Kesava's words, the sons of Pritha, with Draupadi, became easy in mind. And cured of their fever, of anxiety, they said unto him, as persons drowning in the wide ocean safely reach the shore by means of a boat, so have we, by thy aid, O Lord Govinda, escaped from this inextricable difficulty. Do thou now depart in peace, and may prosperity be thine. Thus dismissed, he repaired to his capital, and the Pandavas too, O blessed Lord, wandering from forest to forest, passed their days merrily with Draupadi. Thus, O king, have I related to thee the story which thou askest me to repeat. And it was thus that the machinations of the wicked sons of Dhritarashtra about the Pandavas in the forest were frustrated. Footnotes 516:1 Both these words are of doubtful meaning. It seems they are employed in the Vedas to denote the faculties of knowledge and the moral sense respectively. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 262. Vaisampayana said, these great warriors of the race of Bharata sojourned like immortals in the great forest of Kamayaka, employed in hunting and pleased with the sight of numerous wild tracts of country and wide reaches of woodland, gorgeous with flowers blossoming in season. And the sons of Pandu, each like unto Indra and the terror of his enemies, dwelt there for some time. And one day those valiant men, the conquerors of their foes, went about in all directions in search of game for feeding the Brahmanas in their company, leaving Draupadi alone at the hermitage, with the permission of the great ascetic Trinavindu, resplendent with ascetic grandeur, and of their spiritual guide Daumya. Meanwhile, the famous king of Sindhu, the son of Vridhakshatra, was, with a view to matrimony, proceeding to the kingdom of Sulwa, dressed in his best royal apparel and accompanied by numerous princes. And the prince halted in the woods of Kamayaka. And in that secluded place, he found the beautiful Draupadi, the beloved and celebrated wife of the Pandavas, standing at the threshold of the hermitage. And she looked grand in the superb beauty of her form, and seemed to shed a luster on the woodland around, like lightning illuminating masses of dark clouds. And they who saw her asked themselves, is this an Apsara, or a daughter of the gods, or a celestial phantom? And with this thought, their hands also joined together. They stood gazing on the perfect and faultless beauty of her form. And Jayadratha, the king of Sindhu, And the son of Kurukshetra, struck with amazement at the sight of that lady of faultless beauty, was seized with an evil intention. And inflamed with desire, he said to the prince named Kataka, "Whose is this lady of faultless form? Is she of the human kind? I have no need to marry if I can secure this exquisitely beautiful creature. Taking her with me, I shall go back to my abode, O sir, and inquire who she is and whence she has come, and why also that delicate being hath come into this forest beset with thorns. Will this ornament of womankind, this slender-waisted lady of so much beauty, endued with handsome teeth and large eyes, accept me as her lord? I shall certainly regard myself successful if I obtain the hand of this excellent lady. Go, Kataka, and inquire who her husband may be." Thus asked, Kataka, wearing a kundala, jumped out of his chariot and came near her, as a jackal approacheth a tigress, and spake unto her these words. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 263. Kataka said, "Excellent lady, who art thou that standest alone, leaning on a branch of the Kadamba tree at this hermitage, and looking grand like a flame of fire blazing at night time, and fanned by the wind? Exquisitely beautiful as thou art, how is it that thou feelest not any fear in these forests? Methinks thou art a goddess, or a yakshur, or a Danavi, or an excellent Apsara, or the wife of a Daitya, or a daughter of the Naga king, or a Rakshasi, or the wife of Varuna, or of Yama, or of Soma, or of Kuvara, who, having assumed a human form, wanderest in these forests. Or, hast thou come from the mansions of Dhatri, or of Vidhatri, or of Savitri, or of Vibhu, or of Sakra? Thou dost not ask us who we are, nor do we know who protects thee here. Respectfully do we ask thee, good lady, who is thy powerful father, and, oh, do tell us truly the names of thy husband, thy relatives, and thy race, and tell us also what thou dost here. As for us, I am King Saratha's son, whom people know by the name of Kataka, and that man with eyes large as the petals of the lotus, sitting on a chariot of gold, like the sacrificial fire on the altar, is the warrior known by the name of Kshamakara, king of Trigarta. And behind him is the famous son of the king of Palinda, who is even now gazing on thee. Armed with a mighty bow and endued with large eyes, and decorated with floral wreaths, he always liveth on the breasts of mountains. The dark and handsome young man, the scourge of his enemies, standing at the edge of that tank, is the son of Suvala of the race of Ikshwaku. And if, O excellent lady, thou hast ever heard the name of Jayadratha, the king of Soviras, even he is there at the head of 6,000 chariots, with horses and elephants and infantry, and followed by 12 Sovira princes as his standard-bearers, named Angaraka, Kunjara, Guptaka, Satranjaya, Srinjaya, Suprabhita, Prabhankara, Brahmara, Ravi, Sura, Pratapa, and Kuhana, all mounted on chariots drawn by chestnut horses, and every one of them looking like the fire on the sacrificial altar. The brothers also of the king, viz., the powerful Valahaka, Anika, Vidarana, and others, are among his followers. These strong-limbed and noble youths are the flowers of the Sovira chivalry. The king is journeying in the company of these his friends, like Indras surrounded by the Maruts. O fine-haired lady, do tell us that are unacquainted with these matters, whose wife and whose daughter thou art. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 264. Vaisampayana continued, the Princess Draupadi, thus questioned by that ornament of Sivi's race, moved her eyes gently, and letting go her hold of the Kadamba branch and arranging her silken apparel, she said, I am aware, O Prince, that it is not proper for a person like me to address you thus, but as there is not another man or woman here to speak with thee, and as I am alone here just now, let me, therefore, speak. Know, worthy sir, that being alone in this forest here, I should not speak unto thee, remembering the usages of my sex. I have learned, O Saivya, that thou art Saratha's son, whom people know by the name of Kataka. Therefore, on my part, I shall now tell thee of my relations and renowned race. I am the daughter of King Drupada, and people know me by the name of Krishna, and I have accepted as my husbands 5 persons of whom you may have heard while they were living at Kahandavaprastha. Those noble persons, viz., Yudhishthira, Bhimasena, Arjuna, and the 2 sons of Madri, leaving me here and having assigned unto themselves the 4 points of the horizon, have gone out on a hunting excursion. The king hath gone to the east, Bhimasena towards the south, Arjuna to the west, and the twin brothers towards the north. Therefore, do ye now alight and dismiss your carriages so that ye may depart after receiving a due welcome from them. The high-souled son of Dharma is fond of guests and will surely be delighted to see you. Having addressed Saivya's son in this way, the daughter of Drupada, with face beautiful as the moon, remembering well her husband's character for hospitality, entered her spacious cottage. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 265. Vyasa said, O Bharata, Kodakakya related to those princes who had been waiting all that had passed between him and Krishna. And hearing Kodakakya's words, Jayadratha said to that scion of the race of Sivi, having listened only to her speech, my heart has been lovingly inclined towards that ornament of womankind. Why therefore hast thou returned, thus unsuccessful? I tell thee truly, O thou of mighty arms, that having once seen this lady, other women now seem to me like so many monkeys. I having looked at her, she has captivated my heart. Do tell me, O Saivya, if that excellent lady is of the human kind. Kataka replied, This lady is the famous Princess Krishna, the daughter of Drupada, and the celebrated wife of the 5 sons of Pandu. She is the much esteemed and beloved and chaste wife of the sons of Pritha. Taking her with thee, do thou proceed towards Sovira. Vyasa continued, thus addressed, the evil-minded Jayadratha, the king of Sindhu, Sovira, and other countries, said, I must see Draupadi. And with 6 other men he entered that solitary hermitage, like a wolf entering the den of a lion. And he said unto Krishna, Hail to thee, excellent lady! Are thy husbands well and those, besides, whose prosperity thou always wishest? Draupadi replied, Kunti's son King Yudhishthira of the race of Kuru, his brothers, myself, and all those of whom thou hast inquired of, are well. Is everything right with thy kingdom, thy government, exchequer, and thy army? Art thou, as sole ruler, governing with justice the rich countries of Saivya, Sivi, Sindhu, and others that thou hast brought under thy sway? Do thou, O prince, accept this water for washing thy feet. Do thou also take this seat. I offer thee 50 animals for thy train's breakfast. Besides these, Yudhishthira himself, the son of Kunti, will give thee porcine deer and nanku deer, and does, and antelopes, and sarabas, and rabbits, and ruru deer, and bears, and samvara deer and gayals, and many other animals, besides wild boars and buffaloes and other animals of the quadruped tribe. Hearing this, Jayadratha replied, saying, All is well with me. By offering to provide our breakfast, thou hast in a manner actually done it. Come now and ride my chariot and be completely happy. For it becomes not thee to have any regard for the miserable sons of Pritha who are living in the woods, whose energies have been paralyzed, whose kingdom hath been snatched, and whose fortunes are at the lowest ebb. A woman of sense like thee doth not attach herself to a husband that is poor. She should follow her lord when he is in prosperity, but abandon him when in adversity. The sons of Pandu have forever fallen away from their high state, and have lost their kingdom for all time to come. Thou hast no need, therefore, to partake of their misery from any regard for them. Therefore, O thou of beautiful hips, forsaking the sons of Pandu, be happy by becoming my wife, and share thou with me the kingdoms of Sindhu and Sovira. Vyasa continued, hearing these frightful words of the king of Sindhu, Krishna retired from that place, her face furrowed into a frown owing to the contraction of her eyebrows. But disregarding his words from supreme contempt, the slender-waisted Krishna reproving said unto the king of Sindhu, Speak not thus again. Art thou not ashamed? Be on thy guard. And that lady of irreproachable character, anxiously expecting the return of her husband, began, with long speeches, to beguile him completely. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 266. Vyasa said, The daughter of Drupada, though naturally handsome, was suffused with crimson arising from a fit of anger. And with eyes inflamed and eyebrows bent in wrath, she reproved the ruler of the Suviras, saying, Art thou not ashamed, O fool, to use such insulting words in respect of those celebrated and terrible warriors, each like unto Indra himself, and who are all devoted to their duties, and who never waver in fight with even hosts of Yakshas and Rakshasas? O Sovira, good men never speak ill of learned persons devoted to austerities and endued with learning, no matter whether they live in the wilderness or in houses. It is only wretches that are mean as thou who do so. Methinks there is none in this assemblage of Kshatriya who is capable of holding thee by the hand to save thee from falling into the pit thou openest under thy feet. In hoping to vanquish King Yudhishthira the Just, thou really hopest to separate, stick in hand, from a herd roaming in Himalayan valleys, its leader, huge as a mountain peak and with the temporal juice trickling down its rent temples. Out of childish folly thou art kicking up into wakefulness the powerful lion lying asleep, in order to pluck the hair from off his face. Thou shalt, however, have to run away when thou sayest Bhimasena in wrath. Thy courting a combat with the furious Jishnu may be likened to thy kicking up a mighty, terrible, full-grown, and furious lion asleep in a mountain cave. The encounter thou speakest of with those two excellent youths the younger Pandavas is like unto the act of a fool that wantonly trampleth on the tails of two venomous black cobras with bifurcated tongues. The bamboo, the reed, and the plantain bear fruit only to perish and not to grow in size any further. Like also the crab that conceiveth for her own destruction, thou wilt lay hands upon me who am protected by these mighty heroes. Jayadratha replied, I know all this, O Krishna, and I am well aware of the prowess of those princes. But thou canst not frighten us now with these threats. We, too, O Krishna, belong by birth to the 17 high clans, and are endowed with the 6 royal qualities. We, therefore, look down upon the Pandavas as inferior men. Therefore, do thou, O daughter of Drupada, ride this elephant or this chariot quickly, for thou canst not baffle us with thy words alone, or, speaking less boastfully, seek thou the mercy of the king of the Saviras. Draupadi replied, Though I am so powerful, why doth the king of Sovira yet consider me so powerless? Well known as I am, I cannot, from fear of violence, demean myself before that prince. Even Indra himself cannot abduct her, for whose protection Krishna and Arjuna would together follow, riding in the same chariot. What shall I say, therefore, of a weak human being? When Kiriti, that slayer of foes, riding on his car, will, on my account, enter thy ranks, striking terror into every heart, he will consume everything around like fire consuming a stack of dry grass in summer. The warring princes of the Andhaka and the Vrishni races, with Janardana at their head, and the mighty bowmen of the Kaikeya tribe, will all follow in my wake with great ardor. The terrible arrows of the Nanjaya, shot from the string of the Gandiva and propelled by his arms, fly with great force through the air, roaring like the very clouds. And when thou wilt behold Arjuna shooting from the Gandiva a thick mass of mighty arrows like unto a flight of locusts, then wilt thou repent of thine own folly. Bethink thyself of what thou wilt feel when that warrior armed with the Gandiva, blowing his conch shell and with gloves reverberating with the strokes of his bowstring, will again and again pierce thy breast with his shafts. And when Bhima will advance towards thee, mace in hand, and the 2 sons of Madri range in all directions, vomiting forth the venom of their wrath, thou wilt then experience pangs of keen regret that will last forever. As I have never been false to my worthy lords even in thought, so by that merit shall I now have the pleasure of beholding thee vanquished and dragged by the sons of Pritha. Thou canst not, cruel as thou art, frighten me by seizing me with violence, for as soon as those Kuru warriors will espy me they will bring me back to the woods of Kamayaka. Vaisampayana continued, Then that lady of large eyes, beholding them ready to lay violent hands on her, rebuked them and said, Defile me not by your touch. And in a great alarm she then called upon her spiritual adviser, Daumya. Jayadratha, however, seized her by her upper garment, but she pushed him with great vigor. And pushed by the lady, that sinful wretch fell upon the ground like a tree severed from its roots. Seized, however, once more by him with great violence, she began to pant for breath. And dragged by the wretch, Krishna at last ascended his chariot, having worshipped Daumya's feet. And Daumya then addressed Jayadratha and said, Do thou, O Jayadratha, observe the ancient custom of the Kshatriyas. Thou canst not carry her off without having vanquished those great warriors. Without doubt, thou shalt reap the painful fruits of this thy despicable act, when thou encounterest the heroic sons of Pandu with Yudhishthira the Just at their head. Vaisampayana continued, having said these words, Daumya, entering into the midst of Jayadratha's infantry, began to follow that renowned princess who was thus being carried away by the ravisher. Footnotes 522:1 The 6 acts of a king are peace, war, marching, halting, sowing dissension, and seeking protection. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 267. Vyasa said, Meanwhile those foremost of bowmen on the face of the earth, having wandered separately and ranged in all directions, and having slain plenty of deer and buffaloes, at length met together. And observing that great forest, which was crowded with hosts of deer and wild beasts, resounding with the shrill cries of birds, and hearing the shrieks and yells of the denizens of the wilderness, Yudhishthira said unto his brothers, These birds and wild beasts, flying towards the direction which is illuminated by the sun, are uttering dissonant cries and displaying an intense excitement. All this only shows that this mighty forest hath been invaded by hostile intruders. Without a moment's delay let us give up the chase. We have no more need of game. My heart aches and seems to burn. The soul in my body, overpowering the intellect, seems ready to fly out. As a lake rid by Garuda of the mighty snake that dwells in it, as a pot drained of its contents by thirsty men, as a kingdom reft of king and prosperity, even so doth the forest of Kamayaka seem to me. Thus addressed, those heroic warriors drove towards their abode, on great cars of handsome make and drawn by steeds of the Sandharva breed, exceedingly fleet and possessed of the speed of the hurricane. And on their way back, they beheld a jackal yelling hideously on the wayside towards their left. And King Yudhishthira, regarding it attentively, said unto Bhima and Dhananjaya, This jackal that belongs to a very inferior species of animals, speaking to our left, speaketh a language which plainly indicates that the sinful Kurus, disregarding us, have commenced to oppress us by resorting to violence. After the sons of Pandu had given up the chase and said these words, they entered the grove which contained their hermitage. And there they found their beloved one's maid, the girl Datrika, sobbing and weeping. And Indrasena then quickly alighting from the chariot and advancing with hasty steps towards her, questioned her, O king, in great distress of mind, saying, What makes thee weep thus, lying on the ground, and why is thy face so woebegone and colorless? I hope no cruel wretches have done any harm to the Princess Draupadi, possessed of incomparable beauty and large eyes, and who is the second self of every one of those bulls of the Kuru race. So anxious hath been Dharma's son that if the princess hath entered the bowels of the earth, or hath soared to heaven, or dived into the bottom of the ocean, he and his brothers will go thither in pursuit of her. Who could that fool be that would carry away that priceless jewel belonging to the mighty and ever-victorious sons of Pandu, those grinders of foes, and which is dear unto them as their own lives? I don't know who the person could be that would think of carrying away that princess who hath such powerful protectors, and who is even like a walking embodiment of the hearts of the sons of Pandu, piercing whose breasts will terrible shafts stick to the ground today? Do not weep for her, O timid girl, for know thou that Krishna will come back this very day, and the sons of Pritha, having slain their foes, will again be united with Yagnisini. Thus addressed by him, Datrika, wiping her beautiful face, replied unto Indrasena the charioteer, saying, Disregarding the 5 Indra-like sons of Pandu, Jayadratha hath carried away Krishna by force. The track pursued by him hath not yet disappeared, for the broken branches of trees have not yet faded. Therefore, turn your cars and follow her quickly, for the princess cannot have gone far by this time. Ye warriors possessed of the prowess of Indra, putting on your costly bows of handsome make, and taking up your costly bows and quivers, speed ye in pursuit of her, lest overpowered by threats or violence and losing her sense and the color of her cheeks, she yields herself up to an undeserving wight, even as one poureth forth, from the sacrificial ladle, the sanctified oblation on a heap of ashes. Oh, see that the clarified butter is not poured into an unigniting fire of paddy chaff, that a garland of flowers is not thrown away in a cemetery. Oh, take care that the soma juice of a sacrifice is not licked up by a dog through the carelessness of the officiating priests. Oh, let not the lily be rudely torn by a jackal roaming for its prey in the impenetrable forest. Oh, let no inferior wight touch with his lips the bright and beautiful face of your wife, fair as the beams of the moon and adorned with the finest nose and the handsomest eyes, like a dog licking clarified butter kept in the sacrificial pot. Do ye speed in this track, and let not time steal a march on you? Yudhishthira said, Retire, good woman, and control thy tongue. Speak not this way before us. Kings or princes, whoever are infatuated with the possession of power, are sure to come to grief. Vyasa continued, with these words, they departed, following the track pointed out to them, and frequently breathing deep sighs like the hissing of snakes, and twanging the strings of their large bows. And then they observed a cloud of dust raised by the hoofs of the steeds belonging to Jayadratha's army. And they also saw Daumya in the midst of the ravishers' infantry, exhorting Bhima to quicken his steps. Then those princes, the sons of Pandu, with hearts underpressed, bade him be of good cheer, and said unto him, Do thou return cheerfully. And then they rushed towards that host with great fury, like hawks swooping down on their prey. And possessed of the prowess of Indra, they had been filled with fury at the insult offered to Draupadi. But at sight of Jayadratha and of their beloved wife seated on his car, their fury knew no bounds. And those mighty bowmen, Bhima and Dhananjaya and the twin brothers and the king, called out Jayadratha to stop, upon which the enemy was so bewildered as to lose their knowledge of directions. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 268. Vyasa said, The hostile Kshatriyas, incensed at sight of Bhimasena and Arjuna, sent up a loud shout in the forest. And the wicked king Jayadratha, when he saw the standards of those bulls of the Kuru race, lost his heart, and addressing the resplendent Yagniseni seated on his car, said, Those 5 great warriors, O Krishna, that are coming, are, I believe, thy husbands. As thou knowest the sons of Pandu well, do thou, O lady of beautiful tresses, describe them one by one to us, pointing out which of them rideth which car. Thus addressed, Draupadi replied, Having done this violent deed calculated to shorten thy life, what will it avail thee now, O fool, to know the names of those great warriors? For, now that my heroic husbands are come, not one of ye will be left alive in battle. However, as thou art on the point of death and hast asked me, I will tell thee everything, this being consistent with the ordinance. Beholding King Yudhishthira the just with his younger brothers, I have not the slightest anxiety or fear from thee. That warrior at the top of whose flagstaff 2 handsome and sonorous tabors called Nanda and Upananda are constantly played upon, he, O Sovira chief, hath a correct knowledge of the morality of his own acts. Men that have attained success always walk in his train. With a complexion like that of pure gold, possessed of a prominent nose and large eyes, and endued with a slender make, that husband of mine is known among people by the name of Yudhishthira, the son of Dharma and the foremost of the Kuru race. That virtuous prince of men granteth life to even a foe that yields. Therefore, O fool, throwing down thy arms and joining thy hands, run to him for thy good, to seek his protection. And that other man whom thou sayest with long arms and tall as the full-grown sala tree, seated on his chariot, biting his lips, and contracting his forehead so as to bring the 2 eyebrows together, is he, my husband Vrkodara. Steeds of the noblest breed, plump and strong, well-trained and endued with great might, draw the cars of that warrior. His achievements are superhuman. He is known, therefore, by the name of Bhima on earth. They that offend him are never suffered to live. He never forgetteth a foe. On some pretext or other he wreaketh his vengeance. Nor is he pacified even after he has wreaked a signal vengeance. And there, that foremost of bowmen, endued with intelligence and renown, with senses under complete control and reverence for the old dad brother and disciple of Yudhishthira is my husband Dhananjaya. Virtue he never forsaketh, from lust or fear or anger. Nor doth he ever commit a deed that is cruel. Endued with the energy of fire and capable of withstanding every foe, that grinder of enemies is the son of Kunti. And that other youth, versed in every question of morality and profit, who ever dispelleth the fears of the affrighted, who is endued with high wisdom, who is considered as the handsomest person in the whole world, and who is protected by all the sons of Pandu, being regarded by them as dearer to them than their own lives for his unflinching devotion to them, is my husband Nakula, possessed of great prowess. Endued with high wisdom and having Sadeva for his second, possessed of exceeding lightness of hand, he fighteth with the sword, making dexterous passes therewith. Thou, foolish man, shall witness today his performances on the field of battle, like unto those of Indra amid the ranks of Daityas. And that hero skilled in weapons and possessed of intelligence and wisdom, and intent on doing what is agreeable to the son of Dharma, that favorite and youngest born of the Pandavas, is my husband Sadeva. Heroic, intelligent, wise, and ever wrathful, there is not another man equal unto him in intelligence or in eloquence amid assemblies of the wise. Dearer to Kunti than her own soul, he is always mindful of the duties of Kshatriyas, and would much sooner rush into fire or sacrifice his own life than say anything that is opposed to religion and morals. When the sons of Pandu will have killed thy warriors in battle, then wilt thou behold thy army in the miserable plight of a ship on the sea wrecked with its freight of jewels on the back of a whale. Thus have I described unto thee the prowess of the sons of Pandu, disregarding whom in thy foolishness thou hast acted so. If thou escapest unscathed from them, then, indeed, thou wilt have obtained a new lease of life. Vaisampayana continued, Then those 5 sons of Pritha, each like unto Indra, filled with wrath, leaving the panic-stricken infantry alone who were imploring them for mercy, rushed furiously upon the charioteers, attacking them on all sides and darkening the very air with the thick shower of arrows they shot. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 269. Vaisampayana said, Meanwhile, the king of Sindhu was giving orders to those princes, saying, Halt, strike, march, quick, and like. And on seeing Bhima, Arjuna, and the twin brothers with Yudhishthira, the soldiers sent up a loud shout on the field of battle. And the warriors of the Sivi, Sovira, and Sindhu tribes, at the sight of those powerful heroes looking like fierce tigers, lost heart. And Bhimasena, armed with a mace entirely of Saikya iron and embossed with gold, rushed towards the Saindhava monarch doomed to death. But Kodakakya, speedily surrounding Vrkodara with an array of mighty charioteers, interposed between and separated the combatants. And Bhima, though assailed with numberless spears and clubs and iron arrows hurled at him by the strong arms of hostile heroes, did not waver for one moment. On the other hand, he killed, with his mace, an elephant with its driver and 14 foot soldiers fighting in the front of Jayadratha's car. And Arjuna also, desirous of capturing the Sovira king, slew 500 brave mountaineers fighting in the van of the Sindhu army. And in that encounter, the king himself slew in the twinkling of an eye 100 of the best warriors of the Saviras. And Nakula too, sword in hand, jumping out of his chariot, scattered in a moment, like a tiller sowing seeds, the heads of the combatants fighting in the rear. And Sadeva from his chariot began to fell with his iron shafts, many warriors fighting on elephants, like birds dropped from the boughs of a tree. Then the king of Trigartas, bow in hand descending from his great chariot, killed the 4 steeds of the king with his mace. But Kunti's son, King Yudhishthira the Just, seeing the foe approach so near, and fighting on foot, pierced his breast with a crescent-shaped arrow. And that hero, thus wounded in the breast, began to vomit blood, and fell down upon the ground besides Pritha's son, like an uprooted tree. And King Yudhishthira the Just, whose steeds had been slain taking this opportunity, descended with Indrasena from his chariot and mounted that of Sadeva. And the 2 warriors, Kshimankara and Mahamoksha, singling out Nakula, began to pour on him from both sides a perfect shower of keen-edged arrows. The son of Madri, however, succeeded in slaying, with a couple of long shafts, both those warriors who had been pouring on him an arrowy shower like clouds in the rainy season. Suratha, the king of Trigartas, well versed in elephant charges, approaching the front of Nakula's chariot, caused it to be dragged by the elephant he rode. But Nakula, little daunted at this, leaped out of his chariot, and securing a point of vantage, stood shield and sword in hand, immovable as a hill. Thereupon Suratha, wishing to slay Nakula at once, urged towards him his huge and infuriate elephant with trunk upraised. But when the beast came near, Nakula with his sword severed from his head both trunk and tusks. And that mail-clad elephant, uttering a frightful roar, fell headlong upon the ground, crushing its riders by the fall. And having achieved this daring feat, heroic son of Madri, getting up on Bhimasena's car, obtained a little rest. And Bhima too, seeing Prince Kodakakya rush to the encounter, cut off the head of his charioteer with a horseshoe arrow. That prince did not even perceive that his driver was killed by his strong-armed adversary, and his horses, no longer restrained by a driver, ran about on the battlefield in all directions. And seeing that prince without a driver turn his back, that foremost of smiters, Bhima the son of Pandu, went up to him and slew him with a bearded dart. And Dhananjaya also cut off with his sharp crescent-shaped arrows the heads, as well as the bows of all the 12 Sovira heroes. And the great warrior killed in battle, with the arrow, the leaders of the Ikshwakus and the hosts of Sivis and Trigartas and Sainthavas. And a great many elephants with their colors, and chariots with standards, were seen to fall by the hand of Arjuna. And heads without trunks, and trunks without heads, lay covering the entire field of battle. And dogs, and herons and ravens, and crows, and falcons, and jackals, and vultures feasted on the flesh and blood of warriors slain on that field. And when Jayadratha, the king of Sindhu, saw that his warriors were slain, he became terrified and anxious to run away, leaving Krishna behind. And in that general confusion, the wretch, setting down Draupadi there, fled for his life, pursuing the same forest path by which he had come. And King Yudhishthira the Just, seeing Draupadi with Daumya walking before, caused her to be taken up on a chariot by the heroic Sadeva, the son of Madri. And when Jayadratha had fled away, Bhima began to mow down with his iron arrows such of his followers as were running away, striking each trooper down after naming him. But Arjuna, perceiving that Jayadratha had run away, exhorted his brother to refrain from slaughtering the remnant of the Sainthava host. And Arjuna said, I do not find on the field of battle Jayadratha, through whose fault alone we have experienced this bitter misfortune. Seek him out first, and may success crown thy effort. What is the good of thy slaughtering these troopers? Why art thou bent upon this unprofitable business? Vaisampayana continued, Bhimasena, thus exhorted by Arjuna of great wisdom, turning to Yudhishthira, replied, saying, As a great many of the enemy's warriors have been slain, and as they are flying in all directions, do thou, O king, now return home, taking with thee Draupadi and the twin brothers and high-souled Daumya, and console the princess after getting back to our asylum. That foolish king of Sindhu I shall not let alone as long as he lives, even if he find a shelter in the internal regions or is backed by Indra himself. And Yudhishthira replied, saying, O thou of mighty arms, remembering our sister, Dusala, and the celebrated Gandhari, thou shouldst not slay the king of Sindhu even though he is so wicked. Vaisampayana continued, hearing these words, Draupadi was greatly excited. And that highly intelligent lady in her excitement said to her two husbands, Bhima and Arjuna, with indignation mixed with modesty, If you care to do what is agreeable to me, you must slay that mean and despicable wretch, that sinful, foolish, infamous, and contemptible chief of the Saindhava clan. That foe who forcibly carries away a wife, and he that wrests a kingdom, should never be forgiven on the battlefield, even though he should supplicate for mercy. Thus admonished, those two valiant warriors went in search of the Saindhava chief. And the king, taking Krishna with him, returned home, accompanied by his spiritual advisor. And on entering the hermitage, he found it was laid over with seats for the ascetics, and crowded with their disciples, and graced with the presence of Markandeya and other Brahmanas. And while those Brahmanas were gravely bewailing the lot of Draupadi, Yudhishthira, endued with great wisdom, joined their company with his brothers. And beholding the king thus come back after having defeated the Saindhava and the Sovira host and recovered Draupadi, they were all elated with joy. And the king took his seat in their midst. And the excellent princess Krishna entered the hermitage with the two brothers. Meanwhile Bhima and Arjuna, learning the enemy was full 2 miles ahead of them, urged their horses to greater speed in pursuit of him. And the mighty Arjuna performed a wonderful deed, killing the horse of Jayadratha, although they were full 2 miles ahead of them. Armed with celestial weapons, undaunted by difficulties, he achieved this difficult feat with arrows inspired with mantras. And then the two warriors, Bhima and Arjuna, rushed towards the terrified king of Sindhu, whose horses had been slain and who was alone and perplexed in mind. And the latter was greatly grieved on seeing his steeds slain. And beholding Dhananjaya do such a daring deed, and intent on running away, he followed the same forest track by which he had come. And Falguna, seeing the Saindhava chief so active in his fright, overtook him and addressed him, saying, Possessed of so little manliness, how couldst thou dare to take away a lady by force? Turn round, O prince, it is not meet that thou shouldst run away. How canst thou act so, leaving thy followers in the midst of thy foes? Although addressed by the sons of Pritha thus, the monarch of Sindhu did not even once turn round. And then bidding him to what he chose, the mighty Bhima overtook him in an instant, but the kind Arjuna entreated him not to kill that wretch. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 270. Vaisampayana said, Jayadratha, flying for his life upon beholding those two brothers with upraised arms, was sorely grieved and bolted off with speed and coolness. But the mighty and indignant Bhimasena, descending from his chariot, ran after him thus fleeing, and seized him by the hair of his head. And holding him high up in the air, Bhima thrust him on the ground with violence. And seizing the prince by the head, he knocked him about. And when the wretch recovered consciousness, he groaned aloud and wanted to get up on his legs. But that hero endued with mighty arms kicked him on the head. And Bhima pressed him on the breast with his knees as well as with his fists. And the prince, thus belabored, soon became insensible. Then Falguna dissuaded the wrathful Bhimasena from inflicting further chastisement on the prince by reminding him of what Yudhishthira had said regarding their sister, Dusala. But Bhima replied, saying, This sinful wretch hath done a cruel injury to Krishna, who never can bear such treatment. He, therefore, deserveth to die at hands. But what can I do? The king is always overflowing with mercy, and thou, too, art constantly putting obstacles in my way from a childish sense of virtue. Having said these words, Vrkodara, with his crescent-shaped arrow, shaved the hair of the prince's head, heaving 5 tufts in as many places. Jayadratha uttered not a word at this. Then Vrkodara, addressing the foe, said, If thou wishest to live, listen to me. O fool! I shall tell thee the means to attain that wish. In public assemblies and in open courts thou must say, I am the slave of the Pandavas. On this condition alone, I will pardon thee thy life. This is the customary rule of conquest on the field of battle. Thus addressed and treated, King Jayadratha said to the mighty and fierce warrior who always looked awful, Be it so. And he was trembling and senseless and begrimed with dust. Then Arjuna and Vrkodara, securing him with chains, thrust him into a chariot. And Bhima, himself mounting that chariot, and accompanied by Arjuna, drove towards the hermitage. And approaching Yudhishthira seated there, he placed Jayadratha in that condition before the king. And the king, smiling, told him to set the Sindhu prince at liberty. Then Bhima said unto the king, Do thou tell Draupadi that this wretch hath become the slave of the Pandavas. Then his eldest brother said unto him affectionately, If thou hast any regard for us, do thou set this wretch at liberty. And Draupadi too, reading the king's mind, said, Let him off. He hath become a slave of the king's, and thou, too, hast disfigured him by leaving 5 tufts of hair on his head. Then that crestfallen prince, having obtained his liberty, approached King Yudhishthira and bowed down unto him. And seeing those Munis there, he saluted them also. Then the kind-hearted King Yudhishthira, the son of Dharma, beholding Jayadratha in that condition, almost supported by Arjuna, said unto him, Thou art a free man now, I emancipate thee. Now go away and be careful not to do such thing again, shame to thee. Thou hadst intended to take away a lady by violence, even though thou art so mean and powerless. What other wretch save thee would think of acting thus? Then that foremost king of Bharata's race eyed with pity that perpetrator of wicked deeds, and believing that he had lost his senses, said, Mayst thy heart grow in virtue. Never set thy heart again on immoral deeds. Thou mayst depart in peace now with thy charioteers, cavalry, and infantry. Thus addressed by Yudhishthira, the prince, O Bharata, was overpowered with shame, and bending down his head, he silently and sorrowfully wended his way to the place where the Ganga debouches on the plains. And imploring the protection of the god of 3 eyes, the consort of Uma, he did severe penance at that place. And the 3-eyed god, pleased with his austerities, deigned to accept his offerings in person. And he also granted him a boon. Do thou listen, O monarch, how the prince received that boon. Jayadratha, addressing that god, asked the boon, May I be able to defeat in battle all the 5 sons of Pandu on their chariots. The god, however, told him this cannot be. And Mahesvara said, None can slay or conquer them in battle. Save Arjuna, however, thou shalt be able to only check them once on the field of battle. The heroic Arjuna, with mighty arms, is the god incarnate styled Nara. He practiced austerities of old in the Vidari forest. The god Narayana is his friend. Therefore, he is unconquerable of the very gods. I myself have given him the celestial weapon called Pasapata. From the regents also of all the 10 cardinal points, he has acquired the thunderbolt and other mighty weapons. And the great god Vishnu, who is the infinite spirit, the Lord preceptor of all the gods, is the supreme being without attributes, and the soul of the universe, and existeth pervading the whole creation. At the termination of a cycle of ages, assuming the shape of the all-consuming fire, he consumed the whole universe with mountains and seas and islands and hills and woods and forests. And after the destruction of the Naga world, also in the subterranean regions in the same way, vast masses of many-colored and loud-pealing clouds, with streaks of lightning, spreading along the entire welkin, had appeared on high. Then pouring down water in torrents thick as axles of cars, and filling the space everywhere, these extinguishing that all-consuming fire. When at the close of 4,000 yugas the earth thus became flooded with water, like one vast sea, and all mobile creatures were hushed in death, and the sun and the moon and the winds were all destroyed, and the universe was devoid of planets and stars, the supreme being called Narayana, unknowable by the senses, adorned with 1,000 heads and as many eyes and legs, became desirous of rest. And the serpent Sesha, looking terrible with his 1,000 hoods, and shining with the splendor of 10,000 suns, and white as the kunda flower or the moon or a string of pearls, or the white lotus, or milk, or the fibers of a lotus stalk, served for his conch. And that adorable and omnipotent god thus slept on the bosom of the deep, enveloping all space with nocturnal gloom. And when his creative faculty was excited, he awoke and found the universe denuded of everything. In this connection, the following sloka is recited respecting the meaning of Narayana. Water was created by the Rishi, Nara, and it formed his corpus, therefore do we hear it styled as Nara. And because it formed his ayana, resting place, therefore is he known as Narayana. As soon as that everlasting being was engaged in meditation for the recreation of the universe, a lotus flower instantaneously came into existence from his navel, and the four-faced Brahma came out of that navel lotus. And then the grandsire of all creatures, seating himself on that flower and finding that the whole universe was a blank, created in his own likeness, and from his will, the 9 great rishis, Marichi, and others. And these in their turn observing the same thing, completed the creation by creating yakshas, rakshas, pisachas, reptiles, men, and all mobile and immobile creatures. The Supreme Spirit hath 3 conditions. In the form of Brahma, he is the creator, and in the form of Vishnu he is the preserver, and in his form as Rudra, he is the destroyer of the universe. O King of Sindhu, hast thou not heard of the wonderful achievements of Vishnu, described to thee by the Munis and the Brahmanas learned in the Vedas? When the world was thus reduced to one vast sea of water, with only the heavens above, the Lord, like a firefly at night time during the rainy season, moved about hither and thither in search of stable ground, with the view of rehabilitating his creation, and became desirous of raising the earth submerged in water. What shape shall I take to rescue the earth from this flood? So thinking and contemplating with divine insight, he bethought himself of the shape of a wild boar fond of sporting in water. And assuming the shape of a sacrificial boar shining with effulgence and instinct with the Vedas and 10 yojanas in length, with pointed tusks and a complexion like dark clouds, and with a body huge as a mountain, and roaring like a conglomeration of clouds, the Lord plunged into the waters, and lifted up the earth with one of his tusks, and replaced it in its proper sphere. At another time, the mighty Lord, assuming a wonderful form with a body half lion, half man, and squeezing his hands, repaired to the court of the ruler of the Daityas. That progenitor of the Daityas, the son of Dithi, who was the enemy of the gods, beholding the Lord's peculiar form, burst out into passion and his eyes became inflamed with rage. And Hiranyakasipu, the warlike son of Dithi and the enemy of the gods, adorned with garlands and looking like a mass of dark clouds, taking up his trident in hand and roaring like the clouds, rushed on that being half lion, half man. Then that powerful king of wild beasts, half man, half lion, taking a leap in the air, instantly rent the Daitya in twain by means of his sharp claws. And the adorable lotus-eyed lord of great effulgence, having thus slain the Daitya king for the well-being of all creatures, again took his birth in the womb of Aditi as son of Kasyapa. And at the expiration of 1,000 years she was delivered of that superhuman conception. And then was born that being, of the hue of rain-charged clouds, with bright eyes, and of dwarfish stature. He had the ascetic staff and waterpot in hand, and was marked with the emblem of a curl of hair on the breast. And that adorable being wore matted locks and the sacrificial thread, and he was stout and handsome and resplendent with luster. And that being, arriving at the sacrificial enclosure of Vali, king of the Dandavas, entered the sacrificial assembly with the aid of Vrahaspati. And beholding that dwarf-bodied being, Vali was well pleased, and said unto him, I am glad to see thee, O Brahmana. Say, what is it that thou wantest from me? Thus addressed by Vali, the dwarf god replied with a smile, saying, So be it. Do thou, lord of the Dandavas, give me 3 paces of ground. And Vali contented to give what that Brahmana of infinite power had asked. And while measuring with his paces the space he sought, Hari assumed a wonderful and extraordinary form. And with only 3 paces he instantly covered this illimitable world. And then that everlasting God, Vishnu, gave it away unto Indra. This history, which has just been related to thee, is celebrated as the incarnation of the dwarf, and from him all the gods had their being, and after him the world is said to be Vaishnava, or pervaded by Vishnu. And for the destruction of the wicked and the preservation of religion, even he hath taken his birth among men in the race of the Yadus. And the adorable Vishnu is styled Krishna. These, O King of Sindhu, are the achievements of the Lord whom all the worlds worship and whom the learned describe as without beginning and without end, unborn and divine. They call him the unconquerable Krishna with conch shell, discus, and mace, and adorned with the emblem of a curl of hair, divine, clad in silken robes of yellow hue, and the best of those versed in the art of war. Arjuna is protected by Krishna, the possessor of these attributes. That glorious and lotus-eyed being of infinite power, that slayer of hostile heroes, riding in the same chariot with Pritha's son, protecteth him. He is, therefore, invincible. The very gods cannot resist his power, still less can one with human attributes vanquish the son of Pritha in battle. Therefore, O king, thou must let him alone. Thou shalt, however, be able to vanquish for a single day only the rest of Yudhishthira's forces along with thine enemies the 4 sons of Pandu. Vaisampayana continued, having said these words unto that prince, the adorable Hara of 3 eyes, the destroyer of all sins, the consort of Uma, and lord of wild beasts, the destroyer of Dakshas, sacrifice, the slayer of Tripura, and he that had plucked out the eyes of Bhaga, surrounded by his dwarfish and hunchbacked and terrible followers, having frightful eyes and ears and uplifted arms, vanished, O tiger among kings, from that place with his consort Uma. And the wicked Jayadratha also returned home, and the sons of Pandu continued to dwell in the forest of Kamayaka. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 271. Janamejaya said, What did those tigers among men, the Pandavas, do, after they had suffered such misery in consequence of the ravishment of Draupadi? Vaisampayana said, Having defeated Jayadratha and rescued Krishna, the virtuous king Yudhishthira took his seat by the side of that best of Munis. And among those foremost of ascetics who were expressing their grief upon bearing Draupadi's misfortune, Yudhishthira, the son of Pandu, addressed Markandeya, saying, O adorable sire, amongst the gods and the ascetics, thou art known to have the fullest knowledge of both the past as well as the future. A doubt existeth in my mind, which I would ask thee to solve. This lady is the daughter of Drupada. She hath issued from the sacrificial altar, and hath not been begotten of the flesh, and she is highly blessed, and is also the daughter-in-law of the illustrious Pandu. I incline to think that time, and human destiny that dependeth on our acts, and the inevitable, are irresistible in respect of creatures. If it were not so, how could such a misfortune afflict this wife of ours so faithful and virtuous, like a false accusation of theft against an honest man? The daughter of Drupada hath never committed any sinful act, nor hath she done anything that is not commendable. On the contrary, she hath assiduously practiced the highest virtues towards Brahmanas. And yet the foolish king Jayadratha had carried her away by force. In consequence of this act of violence on her, that sinful wretch hath his hair shaved off his head and sustained also, with all his allies, defeat in battle. It is true we have rescued her after slaughtering the troops of Sindhu. But the disgrace of this ravishment of our wife during our hours of carelessness hath stained us, to be sure. This life in the wilderness is full of miseries. We subsist by chase, and though dwelling in the woods, we are obliged to slay the denizens thereof that live with us. This exile also that we suffer is due to the act of deceitful kinsmen. Is there any one who is more unfortunate than I am? Hath thou ever seen or heard of such a one before? Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 272. Markandeya said, O bull of the Bharata race, even Rama suffered unparalleled misery, for the evil-minded Ravana, king of the Rakshasas, having recourse to deceit and overpowering the vulture Jatayu, forcibly carried away his wife Sita from his asylum in the woods. Indeed, Rama, with the help of Sugriva, brought her back, constructing a bridge across the sea, and consuming Lanka with his keen-edged arrows. Yudhishthira said, In what race was Rama born, and what was the measure of his might and prowess? Whose son also was Ravana, and for what was it that he had any misunderstanding with Rama? It behoveth thee, O illustrious one, to tell me all this in detail, for I long to hear the story of Rama of great achievements. Markandeya said, Listen, O prince of Bharata's race, to this old history exactly as it happened. I will tell thee all about the distress suffered by Rama together with his wife. There was a great king named Aya sprung from the race of Ikshwaku. He had a son named Dasaratha who was devoted to the study of the Vedas and was ever pure. And Dasaratha had 4 sons conversant with morality and profit known by the names, respectively, of Rama, Lakshmana, Satrughna, and the mighty Bharata. And Rama had for his mother Kausalya, and Bharata had for his mother Kaikeyi, while those scourge of their enemies Lakshmana and Satrughna were the sons of Sumitra. And Janaka was the king of Videha, and Sita was his daughter. And Tastri himself created her, desiring to make her the beloved wife of Rama. I have now told thee the history of both Rama's and Sita's birth. And now, O king, I will relate unto thee birth of Ravana. That lord of all creatures and the creator of the universe, viz., the self-create Prajapati himself, that god possessed of great ascetic merit, is the grandfather of Ravana. And Pulasatya hath a mighty son called Vaisravana, begotten of a cow. But his son, leaving his father, went to his grandfather. And, O king, angered at this, his father then created a second self of himself. And with half of his own self that regenerate one became born of Vishrava for wreaking a vengeance on Vaisravana. But the grandsire, pleased with Vaisravana, gave him immortality, and sovereignty of all the wealth of the universe, the guardianship of one of the cardinal points, the friendship of Isana, and a son named Nalakuvara. And he also gave him for his capital Lanka, which was guarded by hosts of Rakshasas, and also a chariot called Pushpaka capable of going everywhere according to the will of the rider. And the kingship of the Yakshas and the sovereignty over sovereigns were also his. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 273. Markandeya said, The Muni named Vishrava, who was begotten of half the soul of Pulasatya, in a fit of passion, began to look upon Vaisravana with great anger. But, O monarch, Kuvara, the king of the Rakshasas, knowing that his father was angry with him, always sought to please him. And, O best of Bharata's race, that king of kings living in Lanka, and born upon the shoulders of men, sent 3 Rakshasa women to wait upon his father. Their names, O king, were Pushpokata, Raka, and Malini. And they were skilled in singing and dancing, and were always assiduous in their attentions on that high-souled rishi. And those slender-waisted ladies vied with one another, O king, in gratifying the rishi. And that high-souled and adorable being was pleased with them and granted them boons. And to every one of them he gave princely sons according to their desire. 2 sons, those foremost of Rakshasas, named Kumbhakarna and the 10-headed Ravana, both unequaled on earth in prowess, were born to Pushpokata. And Malini had a son named Vibhishana, and Raka had twin children named Kara and Sarpanaka. And Vibhishana surpassed them all in beauty. And that excellent person was very pious and assiduously performed all religious rites. But that foremost of Rakshasas, with 10 heads, was the eldest to them all. And he was religious and energetic and possessed of great strength and prowess. And the Rakshasa Kumbhakarna was the most powerful in battle, for he was fierce and terrible and a thorough master of the arts of illusion. And Kara was proficient in archery and hostile to the Brahmanas, subsisting as he did on flesh. And the fierce Sarpanaka was constant source of trouble to the ascetics. And the warriors, learned in the Vedas and diligent in ceremonial rites, all lived with their father in the Gandhamadana. And there they beheld Vaisravana seated with their father, possessed of riches and borne on the shoulders of men. And seized with jealousy, they resolved upon performing penances. And with ascetic penances of the most severe kind, they gratified Brahma. And the 10-headed Ravana, supporting life by means of air alone and surrounded by the 5 sacred fires and absorbed in meditation, remained standing on one leg for 1,000 years. And Kumbhakarna, with head downwards and with restricted diet, was constant in austerities. And the wise and magnanimous Vibhishana, observing fasts and subsisting only on dry leaves and engaged in meditation, practiced severe austerities for a long period. And Kara and Sarpanaka, with cheerful hearts, protected and attended on them while they were performing those austerities. And at the close of 1,000 years, the invincible 10-headed one, cutting off his own heads, offered them as offering to the sacred fire. And at this act of his, the Lord of the universe was pleased with him. And then Brahma, personally appearing to them, bade them desist from those austerities and promised to grant boons unto every one of them. And the adorable Brahma said, I am pleased with you, my sons. Cease now from these austerities and ask boons of me. Whatever your desires may be, they, with the single exception of that of immortality, will be fulfilled. As thou hast offered thy heads to the fire from great ambition, they will again adorn thy body as before, according to thy desire. And thy body will not be disfigured, and thou shalt be able to assume any form according to thy desire, and become the conqueror of thy foes in battle. There is no doubt of this. Thereupon Ravana said, May I never experience defeat at the hands of Gandharvas, celestials, Kinnaras, Asuras, Yakshas, Rakshasas, serpents, and all other creatures. Brahma said, From those that hast named, thou shalt never have cause of fear, except from men, thou shalt have no occasion for fear. Good betide thee. So hath it been ordained by me. Markandeya said, thus addressed, the 10-headed Ravana was highly gratified, for on account of his perverted understanding, the man-eating one slightened human beings. Then the great-grandsire addressed Kumbhakarna as before. His reason being clouded by darkness, he asked for long-lasting sleep. Saying, It shall be so. Brahma then addressed Vibhishana, O my son, I am much pleased with thee. Ask any boon thou pleasest. Thereupon, Vibhishana replied, Even in great danger, may I never swerve from the path of righteousness, and though ignorant, may I, O adorable sire, be illumined with the light of divine knowledge. And Brahma replied, O scourge of thy enemies, as thy soul inclines not to unrighteousness although born in the Rakshasa race, I grant thee immortality. Markandeya continued, having obtained this boon, the 10-headed Rakshasa defeated Kuvara in battle and obtained from him the sovereignty of Lanka. That adorable being, leaving Lanka and followed by Gandharvas, Yakshas, Rakshas, and Kinnaras, went to live on Mount Gandhamadana. And Ravana forcibly took from him the celestial chariot Pushpaka. And upon this Vaisravana cursed him, saying, This chariot shall never carry thee, it shall bear him who will slay thee in battle. And as thou hast insulted me, thy elder brother, thou shalt soon die. The pious Vibhishana, O king, treading in the path followed by the virtuous and possessed of great glory, followed Kuvara. That adorable lord of wealth, highly pleased with his younger brothers, invested him with the command of the Yaksha and Raksha hosts. On the other hand, the powerful and man-eating Rakshasas and Pisachas, having assembled together, invested the 10-headed Ravana with their sovereignty. And Ravana, capable of assuming any form at will and terrible in prowess, and capable also of passing through the air, attacked the gods and the Daityas and wrested from them all their valuable possessions. And as he had terrified all creatures, he was called Ravana. And Ravana, capable of mustering any measure of might, inspired the very gods with terror. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 274. Markandeya said, then the Brahmarshis, the Siddhas and the Devarshis, with Havyavaha as their spokesman, sought the protection of Brahma. And Agni said, that powerful son of Vishrava, the 10-headed cannot be slain on account of thy boon. Endued with great might he oppresseth in every possible way the creatures of the earth. Protect us, therefore, O adorable one. There is none else save thee to protect us. Brahma said, O Agni, he cannot be conquered in battle by either the gods or the Asuras. I have already ordained that which is needful for that purpose. Indeed his death is near. Urged by me, the 4-headed god hath already been incarnate for that object. Even Vishnu, that foremost of smiters, will achieve that object. Markandeya continued, then the grandsire also asked Sakra, in their presence, be thou, with all the celestials, born on earth. And beget ye on monkeys and bears, heroic sons, possessed of great strength and capable of assuming any form at will as allies of Vishnu. And at this, the gods, the Gandharvas and the Danavas quickly assembled to take counsel as to how they should be born on earth according to their respective parts. And in their presence the boon-giving god commanded a Gandharvi, by name Dundubi, saying, go therefore accomplishing this object. And Dundubi, hearing these words of the grandsire, was born in the world of men as the hunchback Manthara. And all the principal celestials, with Sakra and others, begot offspring upon the wives of the foremost of monkeys and bears. And those sons equaled their sires in strength and fame. And they were capable of splitting mountain peaks, and their weapons were stones and trees of the Sala and the Tala species. And their bodies were hard as adamant, and they were possessed of very great strength. And they were all skilled in war and capable of mustering any measure of energy at will. And they were equal to 1,000 elephants in might, and they resembled the wind in speed. And some of them lived wherever they liked, while others lived in forests. And the adorable creator of the universe, having ordained all this, instructed Manthara as to what she would have to do. And Manthara, quick as thought, understood all his words, and went hither and thither, ever engaged in fomenting quarrels. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 275. Yudhishthira said, O adorable one, thou hast described to me in detail the history of the birth of Rama and others. I wish to learn the cause of their exile. Do thou, O Brahmana, relate why the sons of Dasaratha, the brothers Rama and Lakshmana, went to the forest with famous princess of Mithila. Markandeya said, the pious king Dasaratha, ever mindful of the old and assiduous in religious ceremonies, was greatly pleased when these sons were born. And his sons gradually grew up in might, and they became conversant with the Vedas together with all their mysteries, and with the science of arms. And when, after having gone through the Brahmacharya vows, the princes were married, King Dasaratha became happy and highly pleased. And the intelligent Rama, the eldest of them all, became the favorite of his father, and greatly pleased the people with his charming ways. And then, O Bharata, the wise king, considering himself old in years, took counsel with his virtuous ministers and spiritual adviser for installing Rama as regent of the kingdom. And all those great ministers were agreed that it was time to do so. And, O scion of Kuru's race, King Dasaratha was greatly pleased to behold his son, that enhancer of Kausalya's delight, possessed of eyes that were red and arms that were sinewy. And his steps were like those of a wild elephant. And he had long arms and high shoulders and black and curly hair. And he was valiant and glowing with splendor, and not inferior to Indra himself in battle. And he was well versed in holy writ, and was equal to Vrihaspati in wisdom. An object of love with all the people, he was skilled in every science. And with senses under complete control, his very enemies were pleased to behold him. And he was terror of the wicked and the protector of the virtuous. And possessed of intelligence and incapable of being baffled, he was victorious over all and never vanquished by any. And, O descendant of Kurus, beholding his son, that enhancer of Kausalya's joy, King Dasaratha became highly pleased. And reflecting on Rama's virtues, the powerful and mighty king cheerfully addressed the family priest, saying, Blessed be thou, O Brahmana. This night of the Pushya constellation will bring in a very auspicious conjunction. Let, therefore, materials be collected, and let Rama also be invited. This Pushya constellation will last till tomorrow. And Rama, therefore, should be invested by me and my ministers as prince regent of all my subjects." Meanwhile Manthara, the maid of Kaikeyi, hearing these words of the king, went to her mistress, and spoke unto her as was suited to the occasion. And she said, "Thy great ill luck, O Kaikeyi, hath this day been proclaimed by the king. O unlucky one, mayst thou be bitten by a fierce and enraged snake of virulent poison. Kausalya, indeed, is fortunate, as it is her son that is going to be installed on the throne. Where, indeed, is thy prosperity, when thy son obtaineth not the kingdom?" Hearing these words of her maid, the slender-waisted and beautiful Kaikeyi put on all her ornaments, and sought her husband in a secluded place. And with a joyous heart, and smiling pleasantly, she addressed these words to him with all the blandishments of love: "O king, thou art always true to thy promises. Thou didst promise before to grant me an object of my desire. Do thou fulfill that promise now, and save thyself from the sin of unredeemed pledge." The king replied, saying, "I will grant thee a boon. Ask thou whatever thou wishest. What man undeserving of death shall be slain today, and who that deserves death is to be set at liberty? Upon whom shall I bestow wealth today, or whose wealth shall be confiscated? Whatever wealth there is in this world, save what belongeth to Brahmanas, is mine. I am the king of kings in this world, and the protector of all the four classes. Tell me quickly, O blessed lady, what that object is upon which thou hast set thy heart." Hearing these words of the king, and tying him fast to his pledge, and conscious also of her power over him, she addressed him in these words: "I desire that Bharata be the recipient of that investiture which thou hast designed for Rama, and let Rama go into exile, living in the forest of Dandaka for 14 years as an ascetic with matted locks on head and robed in rags and deerskins." Hearing these disagreeable words of cruel import, the king, O chief of the Bharata race, was sorely afflicted and became utterly speechless. But the mighty and virtuous Rama, learning that his father had been thus solicited, went into the forest so that the king's truth might remain inviolate. And, blessed be thou, he was followed by the auspicious Lakshmana, that foremost of bowmen, and his wife Sita, the princess of Videha and daughter of Janaka. And after Rama had gone into the forest, King Dasaratha took leave of his body, agreeably to the eternal law of time. And knowing that Rama not near, and that the king was dead, Queen Kaikeyi, causing Bharata to be brought before her, addressed him in these words: "Dasaratha hath gone to heaven, and both Rama and Lakshmana are in the forest. Take thou this kingdom, which is so extensive, and whose peace there is no rival to disturb." Thereupon the virtuous Bharata replied unto her, saying, "Thou hast done a wicked deed, having slain thy husband and exterminated this family from lust of wealth alone. Heaping infamy on my head, O accursed woman of our race, thou hast, O mother, attained this, thy object." And having said these words, the prince wept aloud. And having proved his innocence before all the subjects of that realm, he set out in the wake of Rama, desiring to bring him back. And placing Kausalya and Sumitra and Kaikeyi in the vehicles at the van of his train, he proceeded with a heavy heart, in company with Satrufna. And he was accompanied by Vasishtha and Vamadeva, and other Brahmanas by thousands, and by the people of the cities and the provinces, desiring to bring back Rama. And he saw Rama with Lakshmana, living on the mountains of Chitrakuta with bow in hand and decked with the ornaments of ascetics. Bharata, however, was dismissed by Rama, who was determined to act according to the words of his father. And returning, Bharata ruled at Nandigrama, keeping before him his brother's wooden sandals. And Rama, fearing a repetition of intrusion by the people of Ayodhya, entered into the great forest towards the asylum of Sarabanga. And having paid his respects to Sarabanga, he entered the forest of Dandaka and took up his abode on the banks of beautiful river Godavari. And while living there, Rama was inveigled into hostilities with Kara, then dwelling in Janasthana, on account of Surpanaka. And for the protection of the ascetics, the virtuous scion of Raghu's race slew 14,000 Rakshasas on earth, and having slain those mighty Rakshasas, Kara and Dashana, the wise descendant of Raghu once more made that sacred forest free from danger. And after these Rakshasas had been slain, Surpanaka, with mutilated nose and lips, repaired to Lanka, the abode of her brother, Ravana. And when that Rakshasa woman, senseless with grief and with dry bloodstains on her face, appeared before Ravana, she fell down at his feet. And beholding her so horribly mutilated, Ravana became senseless with wrath, and grinding his teeth sprung up from his seat. And dismissing his ministers, he inquired of her in private, saying, Blessed sister, who hath made thee so, forgetting and disregarding me? Who is he that having got a sharp-pointed spear hath rubbed his body with it? Who is he that sleepeth in happiness and security, after placing a fire close to his head? Who is he that hath trodden upon a revengeful snake of virulent poison? Who, indeed, is that person who standeth with his hand thrust into the mouth of the maned lion? Then flames of wrath burst forth from his body, like those that are emitted at night from the hollows of a tree on fire. His sister then related unto him the prowess of Rama and the defeat of the Rakshasas with Kara and Dashana at their head. Informed of the slaughter of his relatives, Ravana, impelled by fate, remembered Maricha for slaying Rama. And resolving upon the course he was to follow, and having made arrangements for the government of his capital, he consoled his sister, and set out on an aerial voyage. And crossing the Trikuta and the Kala mountains, he beheld the vast receptacle of deep waters, the abode of the Makaras. Then crossing the ocean, the 10-headed Ravana reached Gokarna, the favorite resort of the illustrious god, armed with the trident. And there Ravana met with his old friend Maricha, who, from fear of Rama himself, had adopted an ascetic mode of life. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 276. Markandeya said, Beholding Ravana come, Maricha received him with a respectful welcome, and offered him fruits and roots. And after Ravana had taken his seat, and rested himself a while, Maricha, skilled in speech, sat beside Ravana and addressed him, who was himself as eloquent in speech, saying, Thy complexion hath assumed an unnatural hue. Is it all right with thy kingdom, O king of the Rakshasas? What hath brought thee here? Do thy subjects continue to pay thee the same allegiance that they used to pay thee before? What business hath brought thee here? Know that it is already fulfilled, even if it be very difficult of fulfillment. Ravana, whose heart was agitated with wrath and humiliation, informed him briefly of the acts of Rama and the measures that were to be taken. And on hearing his story, Maricha briefly replied to him, saying, Thou must not provoke Rama, for I know his strength. Is there a person who is capable of withstanding the impetus of his arrows? That great man hath been the cause of my assuming my present ascetic life. What evil-minded creature hath put thee up to this course calculated to bring ruin and destruction on thee? To this Ravana indignantly replied, reproaching him thus, If thou dost not obey my orders, thou shalt surely die at my hands. Maricha then thought within himself, When death is inevitable, I shall do his biddings, for it is better to die at the hands of one that is superior. Then he replied to the lord of the Rakshasas, saying, I shall surely render thee whatever help I can. Then the 10-headed Ravana said unto him, Go and tempt Sita, assuming the shape of a deer with golden horns and a golden skin. When Sita will observe thee thus, she will surely send away Rama to hunt thee. And then Sita will surely come within my power, and I shall forcibly carry her away. And then that wicked Rama will surely die of grief at the loss of his wife. Do thou help me in this way. Thus addressed, Maricha performed his obsequies in anticipation, and with a sorrowful heart followed Ravana, who was in advance of him. And having reached the hermitage of Rama of difficult achievements, they both did as arranged beforehand. And Ravana appeared in the guise of an ascetic with head shaven, and adorned with a kamandala and a treble staff. And Maricha appeared in the shape of a deer. And Maricha appeared before the princess of Videha in that guise. And impelled by fate, she sent away Rama after that deer. And Rama, with the object of pleasing her, quickly took up his bow, and leaving Lakshmana behind to protect her, went in pursuit of that deer. And armed with his bow and quiver and scimitar, and his fingers encased in gloves of guana skin, Rama went in pursuit of that deer, after the manner of Rudra following the stellar deer in days of yore. And that Rakshasa enticed away Rama to a great distance by appearing before him at one time and disappearing from his view at another. And when Rama at last knew who and what that deer was, viz., that he was a Rakshasa, that illustrious descendant of Raghu's race took out an infallible arrow and slew that Rakshasa in the disguise of a deer. And struck with Rama's arrow, the Rakshasa, imitating Rama's voice, cried out in great distress, calling upon Sita and Lakshmana. And when the princess of Videha heard that cry of distress, she urged Lakshmana to run towards the quarter from whence the cry came. Then Lakshmana said to her, "Timid lady, thou hast no cause of fear. Who is so powerful as to be able to smite Rama? O thou of sweet smiles, in a moment thou wilt behold thy husband Rama." Thus addressed, the chaste Sita, from that timidity which is natural to women, became suspicious of even the pure Lakshmana, and began to weep aloud. And that chaste lady, devoted to her husband, harshly reproved Lakshmana, saying, "The object which thou, O fool, cherishest in thy heart, shall never be fulfilled. I would rather kill myself with a weapon or throw myself from the top of a hill or enter into a blazing fire than live with a sorry wretch like thee, forsaking my husband Rama, like a tigress under the protection of a jackal." When the good-natured Lakshmana, who was very fond of his brother, heard these words, he shut his ears with his hands and set out on the track that Rama had taken. And Lakshmana set out without casting a single glance on that lady with lips soft and red like the bimba fruit. Meanwhile, the Rakshasa Ravana, wearing a genteel guise though wicked at heart, and like unto fire enveloped in a heap of ashes, showed himself there. And he appeared there in the disguise of a hermit, for forcibly carrying away that lady of blameless character. The virtuous daughter of Janaka, seeing him come, welcomed him with fruits and root and a seat. Disregarding these, and assuming his own proper shape, that bull among Rakshasas began to reassure the princess of Videha in these words, "I am, O Sita, the king of the Rakshasas, known by the name of Ravana. My delightful city, known by the name of Lanka, is on the other side of the great ocean. There among beautiful women, thou wilt shine with me. O lady of beautiful lips, forsaking the ascetic Rama, do thou become my wife." Janaka's daughter of beautiful lips, hearing these and other words in the same strain, shut her ears and replied unto him, saying, "Do not say so. The vault of heaven with all its stars may fall down, the earth itself may be broken into fragments, fire itself may change its nature by becoming cool, yet I cannot forsake the descendant of Ragu. How can a she-elephant, who hath lived with the mighty leader of a herd with rent temples, forsake him and live with a hog? Having once tasted the sweet wine prepared from honey or flowers, how can a woman, I fancy, relish the wretched arrack from rice?" Having uttered those words, she entered the cottage, her lips trembling in wrath and her arms moving to and fro in emotion. Ravana, however, followed her thither and intercepted her further progress. And rudely scolded by the Rakshasa, she swooned away. But Ravana seized her by the hair of her head and rose up into the air. Then a huge vulture of the name of Jatayu, living on a mountain peak, beheld that helpless lady thus weeping and calling upon Rama in great distress while being carried away by Ravana. Footnotes 540:1 Tardmrigam. Formerly Prajapati, assuming the form of a deer, followed his daughter from lust, and Rudra, armed with a trident, pursued Prajapati and struck off his head. That deer head of Prajapati, severed from the trunk, became the star, or rather constellation, called Mrigasirus. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 277. Markandeya said, that heroic king of the vultures, Jatayu, having Sampati for his uterine brother and Arjuna himself for his father, was a friend of Dasaratha. And beholding his daughter-in-law Sita on the lap of Ravana, that ranger of the skies rushed in wrath against the king of the Rakshasas. And the vulture addressed Ravana, saying, "Leave the princess of Mithila, leave her, I say. How canst thou, O Rakshasa, ravish her when I am alive? If thou dost not release my daughter-in-law, thou shalt not escape from me with life." And having said these words, Jatayu began to tear the king of the Rakshasas with his talons. And he mangled him in 100 different parts of his body by striking him with his wings and beaks. And blood began to flow as copiously from Ravana's body as water from a mountain spring. And attacked thus by that vulture desirous of Rama's good, Ravana, taking up a sword, cut off the 2 wings of that bird. And having slain that king of the vultures, huge as a mountain peak shooting forth above the clouds, the Rakshasa rose high in the air with Sita on his lap. And the princess of Videha, wherever she saw an asylum of ascetics, a lake, a river, or a tank, threw down an ornament of hers. And beholding on the top of a mountain 5 foremost of monkeys, that intelligent lady threw down amongst them a broad piece of her costly attire. And that beautiful and yellow piece of cloth fell, fluttering through the air, amongst those 5 foremost of monkeys like lightning from the clouds. And that Rakshasa soon passed a great way through the firmament like a bird through the air. And soon the Rakshasa beheld his delightful and charming city of many gates, surrounded on all sides by high walls and built by Viswakrit himself. And the king of the Rakshasa then entered his own city known by the name of Lanka, accompanied by Sita. And while Sita was being carried away, the intelligent Rama, having slain the great deer, retraced his steps and saw his brother Lakshmana on the way. And beholding his brother, Rama reproved him, saying, "How couldst thou come hither, leaving the princess of Videha in a forest that is haunted by the Rakshasa?" And reflecting on his own enticement to a great distance by that Rakshasa in the guise of a deer, and on the arrival of his brother, leaving Sita alone in the asylum, Rama was filled with agony. And quickly advancing towards Lakshmana while reproving him still, Rama asked him, "O Lakshmana, is the princess of Videha still alive? I fear she is no more." Then Lakshmana told him everything about what Sita had said, especially that unbecoming language of hers subsequently. With a burning heart Rama then ran towards the asylum. And on the way he beheld a vulture huge as a mountain, lying in agonies of death. And suspecting him to be a Rakshasa, the descendant of the Kurukshetra race, along with Lakshmana rushed towards him, drawing with great force his bow to a circle. The mighty vulture, however, addressing them both, said, "Blessed be ye, I am the king of the vultures, and friend of Dasaratha." Hearing these words of his, both Rama and his brother put aside their excellent bow and said, "Who is this one that speaketh the name of our father in these woods?" And then they saw that creature to be a bird destitute of 2 wings, and that bird then told them of his own overthrow at the hands of Ravana for the sake of Sita. Then Rama inquired of the vulture as to the way Ravana had taken. The vulture answered him by a nod of his head and then breathed his last. And having understood from the sign the vulture had made that Ravana had gone towards the south, Rama, reverencing his father's friend, caused his funeral obsequies to be duly performed. Then those chastisers of foes, Rama and Lakshmana, filled with grief at the abduction of the princess of Videha, took a southern path through the Dandaka woods, beholding along their way many uninhabited asylums of ascetics, scattered over with seats of kusa grass and umbrellas of leaves and broken waterpots, and abounding with hundreds of jackals. And in that great forest, Rama along with Sumatra's son beheld many herds of deer running in all directions. And they heard a loud uproar of various creatures like what is heard during a fast-spreading forest conflagration. And soon they beheld a headless Rakshasa of terrible mien. And that Rakshasa was dark as the clouds and huge as a mountain, with shoulders broad as those of a sola tree, and with arms that were gigantic. And he had a pair of large eyes on his breast, and the opening of his mouth was placed on his capacious belly. And that Rakshasa seized Lakshmana by the hand, without any difficulty. And seized by the Rakshasa the son of Sumitra, O Bharata, became utterly confounded and helpless. And casting his glances on Rama, that headless Rakshasa began to draw Lakshmana towards that part of his body where his mouth was. And Lakshmana in grief addressed Rama, saying, "Behold my plight. The loss of thy kingdom, and then the death of our father, and then the abduction of Sita, and finally this disaster that hath overwhelmed me. Alas, I shall not behold thee return with the princess of Videha to Kosala and seated on thy ancestral throne as the ruler of the entire earth. They only that are fortunate will behold thy face, like unto the moon emerged from the clouds, after thy coronation bath in waters sanctified with kusa grass and fried paddy and black peas." And the intelligent Lakshmana uttered those and other lamentations in the same strain. The illustrious descendant, however, of Kurukshetra's race, undaunted amid danger, replied unto Lakshmana, saying, "Do not, O tiger among men, give way to grief. What is this thing when I am here? Cut thou off his right arm, and I shall cut off his left." And while Rama was still speaking so, the left arm of the monster was severed by him, cut off with a sharp scimitar, as if indeed that arm were a stalk of the tila corn. The mighty son of Sumitra then, beholding his brother standing before him, struck off with his sword the right arm also of that Rakshasa. And Lakshmana also began to repeatedly strike Rakshasa under the ribs, and then that huge headless monster fell upon the ground and expired quickly. And then there came out from the Rakshasa's body a person of celestial make. And he showed himself to the brothers, staying for a moment in the skies, like the sun in his effulgence in the firmament. And Rama, skilled in speech, asked him, saying, Who art thou? Answer me who inquire of thee. Whence could such a thing happen? All this seems to me to be exceedingly wonderful. Thus addressed by Rama, that being replied unto him, saying, I am, O Prince, a Gandharva of the name of Viswavasu. It was through the curse of a Brahmana that I had to assume the form and nature of a Rakshasa. As to thyself, O Rama, Sita hath been carried away with violence by King Ravana, who dwelleth in Lanka. Repair thou unto Sugriva, who will give thee his friendship. There, near enough to the peak of Rishyamukha, is the lake known by the name of Pampa of sacred water and cranes. There dwelleth, with 4 of his counselors, Sugriva, the brother of the Monkey King Valley, decked with a garland of gold. Repairing unto him, inform of thy cause of sorrow. In plight very much like thy own, he will render thee assistance. This is all that we can say. Thou wilt, without doubt, see the daughter of Janaka. Without doubt Ravana and others are known to the king of the monkeys. Having said these words, that celestial being of great effulgence made himself invisible, and those heroes, both Rama and Lakshmana, wondered much. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 278. Markandeya said, afflicted with grief at the abduction of Sita, Rama had not to go much further before he came upon Pampa, that lake which abounded with lotuses of various kinds. And fanned by the cool, delicious and fragrant breezes in those woods, Rama suddenly remembered his dear spouse. And, O mighty monarch, thinking of that dear wife of his, and afflicted at the thought of his separation from her, Rama gave way to lamentations. The son of Sumitra then addressed him, saying, O thou that givest proper respect to those that deserve it, despondency such as this should not be suffered to approach thee, like illness that can never touch an old man leading a regular life. Thou hast obtained information of Ravana and of the princess of Videha. Liberate her now with exertion and intelligence. Let us now approach Sugriva, that foremost of monkeys, who is even now on the mountain top. Console thyself, when I, thy disciple and slave and ally, am near. And addressed by Lakshmana in these and other words of the same import, Rama regained his own nature and attended to the business before him. And bathing in the waters of Pampa and offering oblations therewith unto their ancestors, both those heroic brothers, Rama and Lakshmana, set out for Rishyamukha. And arriving at Rishyamukha, which abounded with fruits and roots and trees, those heroes beheld 5 monkeys on the top of the mountain peak. And seeing them approach, Sugriva sent his counselor, the intelligent Hanuman, huge as the Himavat mountains, to receive them. And the brothers, having first exchanged words with Hanuman, approached Sugriva. And then, O king, Rama made friends with Sugriva. And when Rama informed Sugriva of the object he had in view, Sugriva showed him the piece of cloth that Sita had dropped among the monkeys, while being carried away by Ravana. And having obtained from him those credentials, Rama himself installed Sugriva that foremost of monkeys in sovereignty of all the monkeys of earth. And Rama also pledged himself to slay Vali in battle. And having come to that understanding and placing the fullest confidence in each other, they all repaired to Kiskindia, desirous of battle, with Vali. And arriving at Kiskindia, Sugriva sent forth a loud roar deep as that of a cataract. Unable to bear that challenge, Vali was for coming out, but his wife, Tara, stood in way, saying, himself endued with great strength, the way in which Sugriva is roaring, showeth, I ween, that he hath found assistance. It behoveth thee not, therefore, to go out. Thus addressed by her, that king of the monkeys, the eloquent Vali, decked in a golden garland, replied unto Tara of face beautiful as the moon, saying, Thou understandest the voice of every creature. Tell me after reflection whose help it is that this brother in name only of mine hath obtained. Thus addressed by him, Tara, endued with wisdom and possessed of the effulgence of the moon, answered her lord after a moment's reflection, saying, Listen, O monarch of the monkeys. That foremost of bowmen, endued with great might, Rama the son of Dasaratha, whose spouse hath been ravished, hath made an alliance offensive and defensive with Sugriva. And his brother the intelligent Lakshmana, also of mighty arms, the unvanquished son of Sumitra, standeth beside him for the success of Sugriva's object. And Minda and Dvivida, and Hanuman the son of Pavna, and Jamvuman, the king of the bears, are beside Sugriva as his counselors. All these illustrious ones are endued with great strength and intelligence. And these all, depending upon the might and energy of Rama, are prepared for thy destruction. Hearing these words of hers that were for his benefit, the king of the monkeys disregarded them altogether. And filled with jealousy, he also suspected her to have set her heart on Sugriva. And addressing Tara in harsh words, he went out of his cave, and coming before Sugriva, who was staying by the side of the mountains of Malyavat, he spoke unto him thus: Frequently vanquished before by me, fond as thou art of life, thou art allowed by me to escape with life owing to thy relationship with me. What hath made thee wish for death so soon? Thus addressed by Vali, Sugriva, that slayer of foes, as if addressing Rama himself for informing him of what had happened, replied unto his brother in these words of grave import: O king, robbed by thee of my wife and my kingdom also, what need have I of life? Know that it is for this that I have come. Then addressing each other in these and other words of the same import, Vali and Sugriva rushed to the encounter, fighting with Sala and Tala trees and stones. And they struck each other down on the earth. And leaping high into the air, they struck each other with their fists. And mangled by each other's nail and teeth, both of them were covered with blood. And the two heroes shone on that account like a pair of blossoming Kanshikas. And as they fought with each other, no difference in aspect could be observed so as to distinguish them. Then Hanuman placed on Sugriva's neck a garland of flowers. And that hero thereupon shone with that garland on his neck, like the beautiful and huge peak of Malya with its cloudy belt. And Rama, recognizing Sugriva by that sign, then drew his foremost of huge bows, aiming at Vali as his mark. And the twang of Rama's bow resembled the roar of an engine. And Vali, pierced in the heart by that arrow, trembled in fear. And Vali, his heart having been pierced through, began to vomit forth blood. And he then beheld standing before him Rama with Sumatra's son by his side. And reproving the descendant of Kakutsta's race, Vali fell down on the ground and became senseless. And Tara then beheld that lord of hers possessed of the effulgence of the moon, lying prostrate on the bare earth. And after Vali had been thus slain, Sugriva regained possession of Kishkindia, and along with it, of the widowed Tara, also of face beautiful as the moon. And the intelligent Rama also dwelt on the beautiful breast of the Malyavat hill for 4 months, duly worshipped by Sugriva all the while. Meanwhile Ravana, excited by lust, having reached his city of Lanka, placed Sita in an abode, resembling Nandana itself, within a forest of Asokas, that looked like an asylum of ascetics. And the large-eyed Sita passed her days there in distress, living on fruits and roots, practicing ascetic austerities with fasts, attired in ascetic garb, and waning thin day by day, thinking of her absent lord. And the king of the Rakshasas appointed many Rakshasa women armed with bearded darts and swords and lances and battle-axes and maces and flaming brands, for guarding her. And some of these had 2 eyes, and some 3. And some had eyes on their foreheads. And some had long tongues, and some had none. And some had 3 breasts, and some had only 1 leg. And some had 3 matted braids on their heads, and some had only 1 eye. And these, and others of blazing eyes and hair stiff as the camels, stood beside Sita, surrounding her day and night most watchfully. And those Pisachal women of frightful voice and terrible aspect always addressed that large-eyed lady in the harshest tones. And they said, Let us eat her up, let us mangle her, let us tear her into pieces, her, that is, that dwelleth here disregarding our Lord. And filled with grief at the separation from her Lord, Sita drew a deep sigh and answered those Rakshasa women, saying, Reverend ladies, eat me up without delay. I have no desire to live without that husband of mine, of eyes like lotus leaves and locks wavy, and blue in hue. Truly I will, without food and without the least love of life, emaciate my limbs, like a she-snake, hibernating, within a tala tree. Know this for certain, that I will never seek the protection of any other person than the descendant of Raghu. And knowing this, do what ye think fit. And hearing these words of hers, those Rakshasas with dissonant voice went to the king of the Rakshasas, for representing unto him all she had said. And when those Rakshasas had gone away, one of their number known by the name of Trijata, who was virtuous and agreeable in speech, began to console the princess of Videha. And she said, "Listen, O Sita. I will tell thee something. O friend, believe in what I say. O thou of fair hips, cast off thy fears, and listen to what I say. There is an intelligent and old chief of the Rakshasas known by the name of Avindhya. He always seeketh Rama's good, and hath told me these words for thy sake. Reassuring and cheering her, tell Sita in my name, saying, Thy husband the mighty Rama is well and is waited upon by Lakshmana. And the blessed descendant of Raghu hath already made friends with Sugriva, the king of the monkeys, and is ready to act for thee. And, O timid lady, entertain thou no fear on account of Ravana, who is censured by the whole world, for, O daughter, thou art safe from him on account of Nalakuvara's curse. Indeed, this wretch had been cursed before for his having violated his daughter-in-law, Ramba. This lustful wretch is not able to violate any woman by force. Thy husband will soon come, protected by Sugriva and with the intelligent son of Sumitra in his train, and will soon take thee away hence. O lady, I have had a most terrible dream of evil omen, indicating the destruction of this wicked-minded wretch of Pulasudya's race. This night wanderer of mean deeds is, indeed, most wicked and cruel. He inspireth terror in all by the defects of his nature and the wickedness of his conduct. And deprived of his senses by fate, he challengeth the very gods. In my vision I have seen every indication of his downfall. I have seen the 10-headed, with his crown shaven and body besmeared with oil, sunk in mire, and the next moment dancing on a chariot drawn by mules. I have seen Kumbhakarna and others, perfectly naked and with crowns shaven, decked with red wreaths and unguents, and running towards the southern direction. Vibhishana alone, with umbrella over his head, and graced with a turban, and with body decked with white wreaths and unguents, I beheld ascending the summit of the white hill. And I saw 4 of his counselors also, decked with white wreaths and unguents, ascending the summit of that hill along with him. All this botteth that these alone will be saved from the impending terror. The whole earth with its oceans and seas will be enveloped with Rama's arrows. O lady, thy husband will fill the whole earth with his fame. I also saw Lakshmana, consuming all directions, with his arrows, and ascending on a heap of bones, and drinking thereon honey and rice boiled in milk. And thou, O lady, hast been beheld by me running towards a northerly direction, weeping and covered with blood and protected by a tiger. And, O princess of Videha, soon wilt thou find happiness, being united, O Sita, with thy lord, that descendant of Raghu accompanied by his brother. Hearing these words of Trijata, that girl with eyes like those of a young gazelle, once more began to entertain hopes of a union with her lord. And when at last those fierce and cruel Pisachar guards came back, they saw her sitting with Trijata as before. They saw Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 279. Markandeya said, And while the chaste Sita was dwelling there afflicted with melancholy and grief on account of her lord, attired in mean garb, with but a single jewel on the marital thread on her wrist, and incessantly weeping, seated on a stone, and waited upon by Rakshasa women, Ravana, afflicted by the shafts of the god of desire, came to her and approached her presence. And inflamed by desire, that conqueror in battle of the gods, the Danavas, the Gandharvas, the Yakshas, and the Kimpurushas, attired in celestial robes and possessing handsome features, decked with jeweled earrings and wearing a beautiful garland and crown, entered the Asoka woods, like an embodiment of the vernal season. And dressed with care, Ravana looked like the Kopa tree in Indra's garden. But though adorned with every embellishment, that inspired her only with awe, like a beautified banyan in the midst of a cemetery. And that night wanderer, having approached the presence of that slender-waisted lady, looked like the planet Saturn in the presence of Rohini. And smitten with the shafts of the god of the flowery emblem, he accosted that fair-hipped lady, then affrighted like a helpless doe, and told her these words, Thou hast, O Sita, shown thy regard for thy lord too much. O thou of delicate limbs, be merciful unto me. Let thy person be embellished now, by these maids in waiting. O excellent lady, accept me as thy lord. And, O thou of the most beautiful complexion, attired in costly robes and ornaments, take thou the first place among all the women of my household. Many are the daughters of the celestials, and also the Gandharvas that I possess. I am lord also of many Danava and Daitya ladies. 140 millions of Pisachas, twice as many man-eating Rakshasa of terrible deed, and thrice as many Yiksha do my bidding. Some of these are under the sway of my brother who is the lord of all treasures. In my drinking hall, O excellent lady of beautiful thighs, Gandharvas and Apsaras wait on me as they do on my brother. I am, again, the son of that regenerate Rishi Vishravas himself of high ascetic merit. I am renowned, again, as the fifth regent of the universe. And, O beautiful lady, of food and edibles and drinks of the very best kind, I have as much as the Lord himself of the celestials. Let all thy troubles consequent on a life in the wood cease. O thou of fair hips, be my queen, as Mandadari herself. Thus addressed by him, the beautiful princess of Videha, turning away and regarding him as something less than a straw, replied unto that wanderer of the night. And at that time the princess of Videha, that girl of beautiful hips, had her deep and compact bosom copiously drenched by her inauspicious tears shed ceaselessly. And she who regarded her husband as her god, answered that mean wretch, saying, By sheer ill luck it is, O king of the Rakshasas, that I am obliged to hear such words of grievous import spoken by thee. Blessed be thou, O Rakshasa fond of sensual pleasures, let thy heart be withdrawn from me. I am the wife of another, ever devoted to my husband, and, therefore, incapable of being possessed by thee. A helpless human being that I am, I cannot be a fit wife for thee. What joy can be thine by using violence towards an unwilling woman? Thy father is a wise Brahmana, born of Brahma and equal unto that Lord himself of the creation. Why dost thou not, therefore, thyself being equal to a regent of the universe, observe virtue? Disgracing thy brother, that king of the Ikshas, that adorable one who is the friend of Mahesvara himself, that lord of treasures, how is it that thou feelest no shame? Having said these words, Sita began to weep, her bosom shivering in agitation, and covering her neck and face with her garments. And the long and well-knit braid, black and glossy, falling from the head of the weeping lady, looked like a black snake. And hearing these cruel words uttered by Sita, the foolish Ravana, although thus rejected, addressed Sita once more, saying, O lady, let the god having the Makara for his emblem burn me sorely. I will, however, on no account, O thou of sweet smiles and beautiful hips, approach thee, as thou art unwilling. What can I do to thee that still feelest a regard for Rama, who is only a human being and, therefore, our food? Having said those words unto that lady of faultless features, the king of the Rakshasa made himself invisible then and there and went away to the place he liked. And Sita, surrounded by those Rakshasa women, and treated with tenderness by Trajata, continued to dwell there in grief. Mahabharata, Book 3, Section 280. Markandeya said, Meanwhile the illustrious descendant of Raghu, along with his brother, hospitably treated by Sugriva, continued to dwell on the breast of the Malyavat hill, beholding every day the clear blue sky. And one night, while gazing from the mountaintop on the bright moon and the cloudless sky surrounded by planets and stars and stellar bodies, that slayer of foes was suddenly awakened, to a remembrance of Sita, by the cold breezes fragrant with the perfumes of the lily, lotus, and other flowers of the same species. And virtuous Rama, dejected in spirits at the thought of Sita's captivity in the abode of the Rakshasa, addressed the heroic Lakshmana in the morning, saying, Go, Lakshmana, and seek in Kishkindiya that ungrateful king off the monkeys, who understand well his own interest and is even now indulging in dissipations, that foolish wretch of his race whom I have installed on a throne and to whom all apes and monkeys and bears owe allegiance, that fellow for whose sake, O mighty armed perpetuator of Raghu's race, Valley was slain by me with thy help in the wood of Kishkindiya. I regard that worst of monkeys on earth to be highly ungrateful, for, O Lakshmana, that wretch hath now forgotten me who am sunk in such distress. I think he is unwilling to fulfill his pledge, disregarding, from dullness of understanding, one who hath done him such services. If thou findest him lukewarm and rolling in sensual joys, thou must then send him, by the path Valley hath been made to follow, to the common goal of all creatures. If, on the other hand, thou sayest that foremost of monkeys delight in our cause, then, O descendant of Kakutsta, shouldst thou bring him hither with thee. Be quick, and delay not. Thus addressed by his brother, Lakshmana, ever attentive to the behests and welfare of his superiors, set out, taking with him his handsome bow with string and arrows. And reaching the gates of Kishkindia, he entered the city unchallenged. And knowing him to be angry, the monkey king advanced to receive him. And with his wife, Sugriva, the king of the monkeys, with a humble heart, joyfully received him with due honors. And the dauntless son of Sumitra then told him what Rama had said. And having heard everything in detail, O mighty monarch, Sugriva, the king of the monkeys, with his wife and servants, joined his hands, and cheerfully said unto Lakshmana, that elephant among men, these words: I am, O Lakshmana, neither wicked, nor ungrateful, nor destitute of virtue. Hear what efforts I have made for finding out Sita's place of captivity. I have dispatched diligent monkeys in all directions. All of them have stipulated to return within a month. They will, O hero, search the whole earth with her forests and hills and seas, her villages and towns and cities and mines. Only 5 nights are wanting to complete that month, and then thou wilt, with Rama, hear tidings of great joy. Thus addressed by that intelligent king of the monkeys, the high-souled Lakshmana became appeased, and he in his turn worshipped Sugriva. And accompanied by Sugriva, he returned to Rama on the breast of the Malyavat hill. And approaching him, Lakshmana informed him of the beginning already made in respect of his undertaking. And soon thousands of monkey chiefs began to return, after having carefully searched the 3 quarters of the earth, viz., the north, the east, and the west. But they that had gone towards the south did not make their appearance, and they that came back represented to Rama, saying that although they had searched the whole earth with her belt of seas, yet they could not find either the princess of Videha or Ravana. But that descendant of Kakutsta's race, afflicted at heart, managed to live yet, resting his hopes of hearing Sita's tidings on the great monkeys that had gone towards the south. After the lapse of 2 months, several monkeys, seeking with haste the presence of Sugriva, addressed him, saying, O king, that foremost of monkeys, the son of Pavna, as also Angada, the son of Vali, and the other great monkeys whom thou hadst dispatched to search the southern region, have come back and are pillaging that great and excellent orchard called Madhuvana, which was always guarded by Vali, and which hath been well guarded by thee also after him. Hearing of this act of liberty on their part, Sugriva inferred the success of their mission, for it is only servants that have been crowned with success that can act in this way. And that intelligent and foremost of monkeys communicated his suspicions to Rama. And Rama also, from this, guessed that the princess of Mithila had been seen. Then Hanuman and the other monkeys, having refreshed themselves thus, came towards their king, who was then staying with Rama and Lakshmana. And, O Bharata, observing the gait of Hanuman and the color of his face, Rama was confirmed in the belief that Hanuman had really seen Sita. Then those successful monkeys, with Hanuman at their head, duly bowed unto Rama and Lakshmana and Sugriva. And Rama, then taking up his bow and quiver, addressed those monkeys, saying, Have you been successful? Will ye impart life unto me? Will you once more enable me to reign in Ayodhya after having slain my enemy in battle and rescued the daughter of Janaka? With the princess of Videha unrescued, and the foe unslain in battle, I dare not live, robbed of wife and honor. Thus addressed by Rama, the son of Pavna, replied unto him, saying, I bring thee good news, O Rama, for Janaka's daughter hath been seen by me. Having searched the southern region with all its hills, forests, and mines for some time, we became very weary. At length we beheld a great cavern. And having beheld it, we entered that cavern which extended over many yojanas. It was dark and deep and overgrown with trees and infested by worms. And having gone a great way through it, we came upon sunshine and beheld a beautiful palace. It was, O Raghava, the abode of the Daityamaya. And there we beheld a female ascetic named Prabhavati engaged in ascetic austerities. And she gave us food and drink of various kinds. And having refreshed ourselves therewith and regained our strength, we proceeded along the way shown by her. At last we came out of the cavern and beheld the briny sea, and on its shores the Saya, the Malaya, and the great Dardura mountains. And ascending the mountains of Malaya, we beheld before us the vast ocean. And beholding it we felt sorely grieved in mind. And dejected in spirits, and afflicted with pain and famishing with hunger, we despaired of returning with our lives. Casting our eyes on the great ocean extending over many hundreds of yojanas and abounding in whales and alligators and other aquatic animals, we became anxious and filled with grief. We then sat together, resolved to die there of starvation. And in course of conversation we happened to talk of the vulture Jatayu. Just then we saw a bird huge as a mountain, of frightful form, and inspiring terror into every heart, like a second son of Vinata. And coming upon us unawares for devouring us, he said, "Who are ye that are speaking thus of my brother Jatayu? I am his elder brother, by name Sampati, and am the king of birds. Once upon a time, we two, with the desire of outstripping each other, flew towards the sun. My wings got burnt, but those of Jatayu were not. That was the last time I saw my beloved brother Jatayu, the king of vultures. My wings burnt, I fell down upon the top of this great mountain where I still am." When he finished speaking, we informed him of the death of his brother in a few words, and also of this calamity that hath befallen thee. And, O king, the powerful Sampati, heeding this unpleasant news from us, was greatly afflicted and again inquired of us, saying, "Who is this Rama, and why was Sita carried off, and how was Jatayu slain? Ye foremost of monkeys, I wish to hear everything in detail." We then informed him of everything about this calamity of thine, and of the reason also of our vow of starvation. That king of birds then urged us to give up our vow by these words of his: "Ravana is, indeed, known to me. Lanka is his capital. I beheld it on the other side of the sea in a valley of the Trikuta hills. Sita must be there. I have little doubt of this." Hearing these words of his, we rose up quickly and began, O chastiser of foes, to take counsel of one another for crossing the ocean. And when none dared to cross it, I, having recourse to my father, crossed the great ocean which is 100 yojanas in width. And having slain the Rakshasas on the waters, I saw the chaste Sita within Ravana's harem, observing ascetic austerities, eager to behold her lord, with matted locks on head, and body besmeared with filth, and lean, and melancholy and helpless. Recognizing her as Sita by those unusual signs, and approaching that worshipful lady while alone, I said, "I am, O Sita, an emissary of Rama and monkey begotten by Pavna. Desirous of having a sight of thee, hither have I come traveling through the skies. Protected by Sugriva, that monarch of all the monkeys, the royal brothers Rama and Lakshmana are in peace. And Rama, O lady, with Sumitra's son, hath inquired of thy welfare. And Sugriva also, on account of his friendship, with Rama and Lakshmana, inquireth of thy welfare. Followed by all the monkeys, thy husband will soon be here. Confide in me, O adorable lady, I am a monkey and not a Rakshasa." Thus addressed by me, Sita seemed to meditate for a moment and then replied to me, saying, "From the words of Avindya I know that thou art Hanuman. O mighty armed one, Avindya is an old and respected Rakshasa. He told me that Sugriva is surrounded by counselors like thee. Thou mayst depart now." And with these words she gave me this jewel as a credential. And, indeed, it was by means of this jewel that the faultless Sita had been able to support her existence. And the daughter of Janaka further told me as a token from her, that by thee, O tiger among men, a blade of grass, inspired with mantras and thus converted into a fatal weapon, had once been shot at a crow while ye were on the breast of the mighty hill known by the name of Chitrakuta. And this she said as evidence of my having met her, and hers being really the princess of Videha. I then caused myself to be seized by Ravana's soldiers, and then set fire to the city of Lanka. Footnotes 551:1 Abode of Varuna in the original. 551:2 Garuda. 551:3 Pavna, the god of the wind. Present you by HinduMonastery.com.